Hey guys. This is part 4 of What If Naruto was mentored by Kakuzu and became a bounty hunter. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 10 Chaos. Kakuzu stared down at his 3 students as they all stood on the edge of the tree line, watching people stream through the giant doors into Konoha's central arena. It was the day of the 3rd round of the Chunin exams, and Naruto and Fu were expected to be on the battlefield within the next 15 minutes. There was silence among the quartet as all the spectators, foreign dignitaries, their guards, civilians, and ninja of various rank from different countries, filed to their seats. Despite the time constraint, all 3 genin were waiting for the bounty hunter to inevitably break the silence. You all know your roles? He finally asked, though they all knew that it was a statement and not a question. Each of them nodded. Good. Then it is time to take your positions. We will meet up at the first opportunity, he directed at Naruto and Fu. Got it, confirmed Naruto. Kakuzu's gaze lingered on him for an extra moment, intense green eyes boring holes into his student, before he turned around and led Hero towards the entrance. The cobalt-haired boy whispered a hasty, "Good luck" as he passed, but Naruto was too focused on his teacher's last expression to respond. Screw this up and it will be the last thing you do, threatened those eyes. I won't, Naruto promised. Fu nudged him gently, prodding him into motion. The touch was enough to startle the blonde from his rumination, and the 2 jinchuriki set off for the competitor's entrance. Naruto thought that perhaps there had been some other message in Kakuzu's expression. Pride, he almost called it, if Kakuzu had ever shown any pride in the blonde's accomplishments, but decided to let the gesture go in favor of focusing on the task ahead. It wasn't necessary for him to win, of course, because promotions meant little to Rogue Ninja, but the thrill of victory, the idea of proving himself to Kakuzu, and to a lesser extent, to Hero and Fu, definitely gave him motivation to do his best in the upcoming fight. Winning against Neji was practically a necessity for his ego. The battlefield, Naruto realized upon entering, was huge. Walls towering hundreds of feet high enclosed the entire arena, and several step-laddered grandstands overlooked the ground from high above. Trees rimmed the inside of the arena, providing cover and protection in the otherwise barren field. Standing in the center of the grass and dirt area were all the other contestants, save Uchiha Sasuke. Fu and Naruto approached the proctor, a plain man wearing a bandana hideate backwards and with a long saban gripped between his teeth, and took their places next to Orochimaru. If Naruto stood at a slight enough angle that he shielded Fu from Gaara's vision, either jinchuriki commented on it. After another 10 minutes had passed, the Konoha Jonin serving as their proctor cleared his throat. My name is Shiranu Ginma, and I'll be presiding over this final round of the Chunin exams. This, he said, pulling out a piece of paper which displayed the bracket matches, shows the matchups for the competition. Are there any questions? When he was greeted with silence, Ginma raised his voice and announced loudly, We will now begin the 3rd round of the Chunin exams. Will Aburame, Shino, and Sai please remain on the battlefield? Everyone else is free to go up to the viewing balcony in the meantime, he told the genin in a normal voice. The other competitors moved towards the stairwell and took the steps up. They emerged in a small, open viewing balcony high upon one of the stadium walls, closed off by a waist-high railing. The 2 Sunanin took position in one corner, followed by the remaining Konohanin and then Naruto and Fu on the other side. Far below, the figures that were Shino and Sai stood about 100 feet apart, Ginma placed in between them. At the Senbonchuing Jonin's signal, Sai immediately moved away, creating more distance between himself and Shino. The Aburame, he knew, were a clan devoted almost completely to using the bugs within their bodies as their primary attack mechanism. Strategically, putting more space between the 2 was a less than ideal move, allowing the bug nin to take advantage of the distance with his long-range attacks. Except that Sai was also a long-distance fighter, with a healthy background in swordsmanship and physical combat that Shino probably didn't have. As far as the fight's outcome, Sai would have no problem emerging victorious, after thoroughly testing his opponent's skill, of course. Originally, The inquisitor had been mildly surprised that he was even still participating in the Chunin exams. After the preliminaries, he had met with Danzo and explained Uchiha Sasuke's progress and movements in detail, per his mission parameters. When he had inquired how to forfeit the final round of the exams without raising suspicion, Danzo had instead told him to compete. The reason, once Sai had time to actually digest the logic, was really quite simple. Root was, for all intents and purposes, a stagnant, defunct organization. There was only so much growth a group could go through while remaining underground, and recruiting opportunities needed to be taken when they presented themselves. It was a happy coincidence that Sai's opponent was Aburaim Shino. Root's teachings embraced the idea that emotions were the path to destruction. By forfeiting one's feelings, no internal conflicts would get in the way of completing a mission. As a clan, the Aburaim adhered to a very similar set of guidelines, indulging their faith within the realms of logic and clear-mindedness. The fact that they were renowned, if not slightly feared, as a powerful clan, and had even overwhelmed their rivals, the Byuzing Kamizura clan of Iwagakure, lent credit to the effectiveness of their creed. Apparently there was enough similarity to Root's philosophy to pique Danzo's interest in the clan heir. Though Root trained children from a young age in order to effectively quash their emotions, its leader obviously saw potential in bringing older Aburaim into their fold. Hence Sai's new mission, to test the capabilities of the Aburaim heir and reveal the extent of his capacity. It was a mission he would complete to the best of his abilities. To win, he would eventually have to move to close combat range. In the meantime, he would test the Aburaim's skill with his Kikaichu and long-range tactics. Sai pulled out the scroll he used in conjunction with his ninjutsu and unraveled the first 6 inches. Choji Giga, he intoned, scribbling across the parchment with his brush. A bird emerged from the scroll, spread its 6-foot wingspan, and allowed its creator to jump aboard as it took flight. The aviary creature wasn't the largest Sai could produce, but its purpose wasn't battle. It merely needed to provide Shino a larger, more impressive target than Sai himself to expose his talent. Now, thought the Root agent, gazing with emotionless eyes at his opponent from above, what will you do? LL. From his vantage point in the viewing balcony, Naruto watched with detached curiosity as Aburaim Shino launched his clan's parasitic insects at Sai. To Naruto, who had been brought up by Kakuzu to recognize some of the subtleties other ninja displayed in battle, to simplify killing targets when bounty hunting, it was apparent that the Uchiha lookalike was holding back. The guy's name practically screamed alias as it was. Why didn't any of them have surnames to cement their duplicity? The main question he couldn't answer was why. Assuming that Sai was a high-ranking operative posing as a genin, participating in the Chunin exams past the point where it was a team exercise was pointless. It was practically the same situation Haro had found himself in during the preliminaries. There was no logical reason to continue fighting that Naruto could come up with. Down below, a swarm of Kikaichi shot up from the ground and surrounded Sai, nearly spearing his bird in half. Not that their actions mattered too much, Naruto decided. What the higher-ups of the Hidden Leaf did with their own ninja had little effect on his team's mission. He had his own issues to deal with. Kakuzu's sudden, intense focus on his training, for instance. The bounty hunter, for how much he had taken Naruto under his wing, had never really trained Naruto. At least, not with the same intensity, focus, and personal investment as he had in the past 2 weeks. When Naruto was younger, Kakuzu had taken a more active role in his learning, probably to make sure he was grounded in the basics. Now that he was older, Naruto chalked that earlier time up to the fact that he had been completely inept in the ways of the ninja, and thus was a liability. Building up a 5-year-old from scratch often required patience and a firm, guiding hand. Unfortunately, Kakuzu was slightly lacking in both those areas. Naruto didn't exactly blame the rogue Taki. From what little he knew of Kakuzu's past, and that was essentially limited to the one outburst the man had had right before Naruto had gotten Jiangu, those personality traits, or lack thereof, were to be expected. He guessed that his mentor had lived by himself for at least 60 years, brooding in a miserly, narcissistic cycle for the entirety of that time. It was to be expected that Kakuzu had no patience for other people. Considering that, Naruto was amazed that he had escaped with as few scars, both physical and psychological, that he had. Still, the blonde could remember the phases of Kakuzu's training regime, and how the new Chunin had filtered himself from each step. At 8 years old, Kakuzu had taught him the ways of the bounty hunter and, for the most part, left the boy to his own devices with his advancement, trusting that he would teach himself the necessities. Before that time, Naruto had swapped between learning what was deemed normal topics such as math, history, and science from Ryo, and being taught ninja basics, taijutsu forms, chakra theory, secrets of the hidden villages, from Kakuzu. It was the longest amount of consecutive time the jinchuriki could remember actually learning from the man, and he had been unrelenting with the child's education. Stupidity and ignorance were traits that Kakuzu refused to accept in his pupil. Naruto scoffed. Even when Kakuzu tutored him in the necessities, he still half-assed it by pawning him off on another person half the time. "Time is money," he quoted snidely, the voice again sounding suspiciously like Kakuzu. "I can't even get away from him in my own head." He supposed it was the mark of a good teacher that the lesson stuck with him after all this time, though. Sai threw a kick at Shino's torso, then immediately backed away as the Aburaim burst into a cloud of angry kikai. Coinciding with the mercenary lessons was a long stint of elemental training. Kakuzu had informed him of the basics of Futon chakra and ordered him to practice. The man had then disappeared for several months, returned for a week to see the blonde's progress with cutting a leaf, and then left again. Following his next return, Kakuzu oversaw Naruto's next 4 months of training in several basic wind release techniques and extra physical conditioning, including the infrequent spar. Instead of advising his pupil, the former Taki had stood by silently and forced the blonde to go through the motions of practicing his ninjutsu, only giving input when he deemed it necessary. Naruto had been expected to learn it all by himself through sheer trial and error. Kuchio's no jutsu and Jianga had both gone the same way, with Kakuzu instructing him in how to perform the hand seals or what the benefits of each technique was, but nothing beyond that. Sword training hadn't even been performed under Kakuzu's watch, yet another case of neglect, Naruto thought cynically, to get away from me for a year, to focus on Fu, and all of the Suiton techniques he had learned had also been accomplished under Kisame's tutelage. With Kakuzu being a self-proclaimed Suiton expert, since Naruto had so far only seen minimal evidence of his prowess, it was slightly disappointing to have not learned anything from him. But this most recent training, it was completely different from the other experiences. Kakuzu had spent the entire 2 weeks drilling Naruto, teaching the theory, guiding the elemental manipulation, sparring with him, correcting and teaching him, until he could perform to the man's satisfaction one of his signature techniques almost instinctively. Even more impressive, the bounty hunter never once mentioned Fu or insulted Naruto. With respect to his usual attitude, Kakuzu's strange behavior was enough to put the blonde on edge. 3 ink lions surrounded Shino, who sent his insects out to defend himself. Naruto admitted that he was not the smartest person in the world. But despite not being gifted with Kakuzu's level of analytical intelligence, the blonde was perceptive. After catching all the glares and disgusted looks of Konoha's citizens when he was younger, it wasn't overly surprising that he developed such a talent. Under Kakuzu's mercenary teachings, the aptitude for it flourished. As such, he was normally able to read and comprehend people, actions, body language, facial expressions, after a short amount of observation. Kakuzu, of course, was a bit of an exception, with his face almost completely covered, his rigid stance, and his cool, impersonal demeanor. Even then, the jinchuriki was able to understand some quirks of the older ninja due to the sheer amount of time spent with him. Just based on the complete change in training methodology, Naruto could only guess that Kakuzu was nervous about the upcoming mission. Naturally, he had no proof, especially considering that his teacher would never admit to such a thing, but it was a good theory. He assumed that part of the reason Kakuzu got some sort of thrill from chasing down high-ranking ninja was to assert his own power and dominance over his victims. If the blonde was better versed in psychology, he probably could have effectively traced the issue back to Kakuzu's loss to the Shodai Hokage and his lingering desire to prove himself to a village he had long since abandoned. As it was, he only had guesses to go off of. So Kakuzu searched out powerful opponents to fight, which led to him developing a reputation among the underworld and thus being searched out by Akatsuki. That in turn led to the mission to kill Orochimaru. And while the leaf knew Chunin was strong, he was also a different caliber of strong than Kakuzu usually dealt with. Even though he chased after ninja capable in their own right, Kakuzu had enough confidence in his own abilities to leave those battles, mostly, unscathed, and always alive. But Orochimaru was an experienced ninja who had also been recruited to join Akatsuki, and then lived through the perils of his own defection, followed by years of being searched for by practically the entire continent. Compiling that information with everything Zetsu had told them made the snake Sannin out to be a very fearful man. So the only conclusion Naruto was able to arrive at was that the upcoming fight had Kakuzu questioning his own mortality. With the strength of Jianga flooding his body, Naruto wasn't entirely sure how his teacher could be beaten, but he supposed that if all of Kakuzu's hearts were destroyed, if Orochimaru killed him 5 times, then he would die. If Naruto's theory was right, and Kakuzu was truly apprehensive about facing Orochimaru, then the snake Sannin was a far more formidable opponent than the blonde was giving him credit for. The only hitch that Naruto could see in his hunch was that Kakuzu had never before exhibited any sign of fear. Of course, as far as he knew, and with the exception of the first Hokage, the man had also never faced an opponent of Orochimaru's caliber before. However, if the case truly was that Kakuzu was questioning his ability to win, then it made sense that he would want the boy he had put years of his time into, the sole successor of his prized genjutsu, to carry on whatever semblance of a legacy he had, including his ninjutsu. That's what families did, anyway. I wonder if Kakuzu considers us family, Naruto pondered. The immediate answer was no, but the blonde found it hard to believe that 2 people, 3, if Fu was included, could spend so much time together and not think of each other as family members, even for someone as callous and detached as Kakuzu. Fu nudged Naruto in the side. Battle's over. Looks like you'll be up in a minute. The other jinchuriki looked down. There were several puddles of black goo on the ground, and all of them appeared to be writhing. It took the blonde a couple of seconds to realize that the puddles were Sai's ink, which had obtained a thick, glue-like consistency and trapped Shino's Kikai, which were desperately trying to escape. Meanwhile, Sai had moved in for the finishing blow, delivering several swift strikes before holding his blade at Shino's throat. There was silence for a moment until the Abirame intoned, "I surrender." "The winner of this match is Sai," announced Genma. The artist formed a hand seal, and the ink surrounding Shino's bugs disappeared, allowing the insects to fly into the sleeves of their master's cloak. There was a smattering of applause from the audience with the match's conclusion, and Genma continued, "If both combatants will leave the arena, the next match will be between Hyuga Neji and Shinobu. Please report to the arena." "Good luck," Fu whispered as Naruto turned to the stairs. Neji was already at the doorway. "Thanks," he replied. He felt the urge to say something else, but he didn't know what, so he simply nodded and followed his opponent down the steps. They took their places across from each other on the battlefield. Genma looked between the 2 of them, and after asking if they were ready, told them to begin. For a long moment, Naruto wasn't sure what to expect. Neji, similar to the preliminary matches, seemed to stand stolidly in the same position, arms crossed and expression stern. "You seem to want to say something," Naruto prompted at length. "Give up." "Excuse me?" "Forfeit this match," Neji reiterated coldly, "or I will be forced to beat you into submission. You have some sort of superiority complex, don't you? You're an orphan from Amagekure, a clanless nobody from an unknown village," continued the Hyuga, ignoring the barb. "I am a prodigy from the Hyuga clan, the most powerful family within Konoha. Fate has decreed that you will lose to me this day. Either forfeit now or face the might of the Hyuga." "Good lord, you talk a lot," Naruto griped dramatically. "Is this the power of the Hyuga clan? To talk people into submission? I mean, it must be effective, since that other Hyuga bowed out after your little spiel last time." Naruto cupped his chin with a hand, as if in deep thought. Neji's face was slowly flushing in anger. Considering that, I guess you are pretty strong. You dare disrespect the power of the Hyuga? See the Neji. You're a backwater ninja who could never compare to my greatness. I'll show you." A gust of wind blew past Neji, ruffling the long ponytail his hair was in. Naruto moved his hands to his side from where they had been previously clapped together. While the futon, Repusho was not exactly an attacking move, and in fact was weaker when expelled from the mouth, as he had just done, then pushed with his hands, it did provide an excellent distraction. He pondered, looking at his hands as if impressed with his ninjutsu expertise. Funny. It appears as if my weakest technique just stopped your strongest technique. The blonde dug his pinky finger into his ear, taking it out and inspecting it as one might an interesting curio. I guess I have nothing to fear. In the stands, Haro blinked and looked up at Kakuzu. Shinobu seems to be playing with his food, he quipped. Yes, agreed the bounty hunter, a bad habit he seems to have acquired from me. Hyuga Neji settled into a traditional Juken stance. Have it your way. But fate will see that you lose today. You think that you'll win because of your belief in fate, returned Naruto, but we believe in different things. The only thing I put my faith in, he continued, closing the distance between them at a quick pace, is money. Haro raised an eyebrow in mild disbelief of what his teammate just said. Kakuzu grinned wickedly behind his rebreather. But he learns the important lessons as well. Let us see what you are capable of, Naruto. Naruto got within striking range and threw his right fist forward. Neji bent his knees slightly and slid forward, using his left hand to shove the blonde's punch off course and driving his other hand forward. 2 fingers drove a sharp spike of chakra into Naruto's elbow. The undercover Aimnin jumped away, shaking his right arm. He stared at the limb as a tingling sensation emanated from the area Neji struck. So that's what Juken is, huh? Snorted Neji, this is the extent of what you can do, after all that talk? I haven't even activated my Byakugan yet, and now your ability to push chakra through that arm has been compromised. Give up. Apparently Neji didn't see the brilliance of Naruto's strategy. However effective Juken was supposed to be, the blonde guessed there was a disparity with how it worked on him. The tingling in his arm wasn't as bad as he guessed it should be, and when he tried manipulating the air around his hand, it was only slightly less responsive than he was used to. He looked up at Neji and readied himself again. Okay, one more experiment. The jinchuriki charged for the second time, and the Hyuga smirked and shook his head. Such a pointless exercise. He waited until the younger boy was within range before jabbing out with his fingers, aiming for the other arm this time. Unlike the previous bout, Naruto blocked, throwing up his left forearm vertically inside Neji's stance and sending the attack wide. The Hyuga's other arm came forward and speared toward Naruto's chest. He twisted his entire body 90 degrees, narrowly avoiding the strike and bringing his left arm around to plant it in Neji's stomach. Neji turned with the blow, letting his body contort around the limb. Using his momentum, he continued to spin, grabbing the blonde's outstretched arm with one hand and preparing to close several of the chakra points in his opponent's left arm. Now, Naruto thought as he focused upon activating the technique. 3 pokes of Neji's fingers along his arm was all Naruto allowed before he wrenched away, putting enough space between them that Neji couldn't attack. The long-haired genin was already making snide observations about Naruto's cowardice, but the blonde ignored him in favor of analyzing the results of his test. In comparison to the previous gentle fist strike, the fuzzy feeling in his arm was only a fraction as strong. If he was forced to call it anything, the attack was almost like a fly buzzing around his head. It was annoying, yes, but not really harmful to him. He stared at his arm and scowled. I hate it when Kakuzu's right. When their training had begun, Kakuzu made sure to preface it with his assumptions and limited knowledge of the Hyuga's gentle fist taijutsu. The chakra network was the main target of the style. It was disrupted, he guessed, by the Hyuga inserting their own chakra into the pathway of whoever their opponent was. If that was indeed the case, Kakuzu asserted that it should already be less effective against someone like Naruto, whose entire body crawled with the black threads of Jiangsu. It wasn't that the Kinjutsu eliminated or even overrode his chakra network. It merely provided an invisible layer of protection which should interfere with the insertion of foreign chakra. Strangely enough, it never helped block against genjutsu, though he thought that may be because the illusions targeted specific applications of the chakra sensory network, places the Kinjutsu really didn't inhabit, the brain, mostly. Provided that wasn't enough, and if the tingling in his right elbow was any indication, it wasn't. He had Kakuzu's ace in the hole to physical attacks: Doton, Doma, Earth Release, Earth Spear. The bounty hunter had hypothesized that the protective quality of the skin-hardening technique would give Naruto the extra boost needed to overcome the negative effects of Neji's chakra. Judging by how much less the last attack was affecting him, the defensive ninjutsu had done the trick. While grateful, Naruto still disliked how often his teacher was proven correct. But now that I know it works, it's time to get serious. Employing a strategy Kakuzu created, he silently activated the technique he had been working on with Fu. His 2-week training period with Kakuzu had involved more than just learning the Earth Spear technique. The bounty hunter had prepared him well enough that he could activate the defensive ninjutsu to cover certain areas of his body at will. Though his lack of affinity for Doton moves meant that a rushed full body covering was essentially out of the question, at his current level, anyway. After grasping the skill necessary to utilize the technique, Kakuzu had moved on to Naruto's other Earth Release skill set, minimal though it was. That focus led to the creation of the combo Naruto was currently employing. In practical combat, his speed with executing it was rather abysmal, but with no interference forthcoming from Neji, it almost seemed embarrassingly simple to Kawarimi himself with the Tsuchi Bunshin he had created underground. Safely hidden 10 feet below the surface of the earth, Naruto could launch an offensive on Neji with his clone while staying on the defensive. Best of all, with no way for the Hyuga to get to him, he didn't have to worry about the earth clone falling apart. Above ground, said duplicate began to attack Neji, engaging in an intricate dance of physical combat. While that occurred, Naruto moved through the earth by using the Earth Release, hiding like a mole technique, stealthily drawing closer to his opponent. With no fear of interruption, the blonde focused on creating a second Earth clone behind Neji, all the while preparing his own position for a final blow. As the real Naruto moved closer, Neji ducked a high punch from the boy he was fighting. He scowled as his opponent shifted away from his retaliating palm strike, blocking his follow-up with the opposite arm. Something was wrong. The Rain Genin was avoiding every move he performed with a fluidity he had barely displayed in their previous 2 interactions. Neji's instincts warned him of an incoming threat, and he dodged left as a fist transited through his previous spot. A clone? He wondered. The 2 Aim double-teamed him, thoroughly testing Neji's abilities to avoid 2 sets of punches, swipes, and kicks. They do well at coordinating their assault. It appears as if I need to get serious. Byakugan. His vision expanded and inverted, turning the world into a grayscale picture he could see from all angles. Blue chakra ran through both of his opponents, though either was in a system of any chakra network he knew of. They're both clones? His all-seeing eyes focused upon an anomaly below him, the chakra network of a human, Shinobu. Ah, a surprise assault from underground. Pity it won't work against the Byakugan. Neji allowed the 2 clones to maneuver him where they wanted, noting that his opponent's position was almost directly beneath him. There was no point in countering the blows when it was only a matter of time before the Aim launched his ambush. His eyes narrowed marginally as the hooded genin began to rise to the surface. It's time. The clone in front of him adjusted his hips and kicked with his left leg, while the one behind him chopped sideways at his neck. Neji slid his stance wide and pivoted, simultaneously catching the ankle of the first with one hand and blocking the wrist of the second with the other. Then, Naruto popped up from the earth, punch heading straight for Neji's jaw. Naruto felt his fist connect with something solid, and he smirked. It took a second for him to realize that whatever he had just punched wasn't soft, like Neji's flesh should have been, before the long-haired boy called Kaiten, and began spinning. A rotating hemisphere of chakra formed around the Hyuga's body, blasting Naruto backwards across the dirt. Both earth clones dissolved into mud, which was flung away by the motion of the Kaiten. Naruto rubbed his head from where he sat on the ground as Neji slowed to a stop. My eyes see everything, he told Naruto. The blonde rose to his feet and dusted off the borrowed rain ninja clothes. Ah, you had to activate your little Kekkei Genkai to beat a backwater ninja like me. I think that says more about your misguided presumptions than anything else. When Neji didn't reply to his jibes, Naruto grinned. Finally found a way to shut you up, did I? The Hyuga merely shook his head, though when he spoke his voice was a tad unsteady. Your body is infested with innumerable snake-like objects, he said slowly, as if testing the words. Naruto's face went blank, the idea that the Byakugan could identify Jiangu never occurring to him until that moment. Tone resuming its normal arrogance, Neji continued, having not yet seen your chakra network clearly, I was merely surprised. But it doesn't really matter what sort of ability you possess, because a failure will always be a failure, and you will lose. It has already been decided. I'll show you exactly what I can do with my ability, retorted Naruto. Unlikely, Neji snorted, bending his knees and settling into an unusual stance. You're now within my field of divination. I'm wa. Hakro Kujian Sho. And then he moved. 2 palms. Naruto barely managed to block both strikes. 4 palms. He ducked the strike targeting his shoulder, but the next one jabbed down at his collarbone. Fire seemed to erupt from the area where Neji poked him, and Naruto gasped in surprise at the feeling. Whatever Neji was currently doing, it was much more effective than the previous hits had been. I can't block all his blows, Naruto realized as the Hyuga called out, 8 palms. Only got one chance. He silently willed Domu into effect, spurring it to try and cover his entire body even though it had never worked before. Neji's fingers hit his elbow, forearm, chest, and thigh, and the hardening technique halted. It covered one bicep, part of the opposite shoulder, and from Naruto's neck down to his heart. 16 palms. 32 palms. 64 palms. The final blow was an open-handed palm to his hara, and Naruto tumbled end over end for almost 100 feet. Neji deactivated his Byakugan. I used a bit more chakra than I normally would because of your unique body makeup, but the result is as I predicted. You have lost. Not yet, groaned Naruto, staggering to stand. If there was one thing he'd gotten from Kakuzu, it was snide comments about his perseverance. He tried molding some chakra, but a burning sensation built in his arm until he felt that it might explode. Can't use chakra, but it's not like I need it, he thought, staring at his arm. More specifically, at the area where a single black band was etched into his skin as a permanent reminder of what he held. And if there's another thing Kakuzu gave me, it was Jiangu. The Kinjutsu was currently wrestling for control of the blonde's body, fighting to take over to defend its user. Not yet, he placated, willing the threads to remain in his body. They stilled upon his command, relinquishing what he sensed was temporary control back to him. Naruto gave a mental sigh of relief before refocusing his attention upon Neji. For whatever reason, Jiangu, at least while connected to his body in some form, required no chakra to use. It was almost ironic, considering the chakra boost it gave by assimilating other people's hearts. You think you can beat me in your condition? Neji scoffed. The veins around his eyes bulged as his Byakugan reactivated. Once a fool, always a fool. Naruto took that as an invitation to attack. He moved forward, though a good portion of his earlier grace was lacking, pulling a handful of shuriken from his weapon's pouch and hurling them at Neji. The boy dodged, and Naruto, a mere 10 feet away, yanked on the wires attached to the throwing stars. They reversed direction, causing Neji to sigh. Your rudimentary parlor tricks cannot win you this fight. He began to turn on the spot to start a kaiten, but stopped. Hyuga Neji found himself being prevented from using his absolute defense. Black tendrils were twined about both wrists, 2 for each joint, and they were connected to dozens more, all disappearing into the long sleeves of his opponent. What is this? A parlor trick, Naruto parroted, gesturing to the shuriken wire setup currently lying forgotten on the ground, to draw the majority of your attention away from me. So I could use my supposed failure of an ability to win this match. He laced his fingers together in the sign of the snake. Jiangu, Ketsugo Fomu, he hissed. The remaining threads leapt into action, tying themselves more tightly around Neji's wrists, ankles, and waist. LL. That fool, groused Kakuzu, does he not realize that Takigakure is allied with Konohagakure? They could have representatives here, people who could recognize Jiangu. It's impressive though, isn't it, Aizo-sensei? Inquired Haro. I mean, what he's doing with those threads. No, countered Kakuzu, he is still learning. There are many secrets to the technique that he has yet to tap into. What he is doing is befitting of an amateur, not to mention dangerous for our mission. Harrow considered what the man was saying. Do you really believe that? Whether I do or not is none of your concern. Do you see the seal he is making? Harrow nodded. It is completely unnecessary. He has some trouble with asserting his will over the threads at all times, so he created focusing applications utilizing the 12 hand seals in order to better control their actions during what he deems stressful situations. Kakuzu snorted. The one he is currently using is meant to bind. If he would simply buckle down and train himself properly, such a ridiculous concentration method would be unnecessary. The Chunin lapsed again into silence. Harrow considered asking why Kakuzu didn't teach the secrets of the Kinjutsu to Naruto himself, but decided that the man probably had his own reasons to not do so, though he couldn't even begin to fathom what they were. He could only hope that, in spite of Naruto's potential blunder, their plan still went off without a hitch. LL. Arakawa Daisuke stared at the fight between Hyuga Neji of Konoha and Shinobu of AIM and scowled. If that boy truly was from the Hidden Rain, then Daisuke would renounce his position as an elder of Takigakure. One of his bodyguards, Amanojiro, Suiton expert of the Gojo Goko, leaned forward and whispered into his ear, Daisuke-sama, that's... I know, he muttered. The existence of Jiangu was a well-kept secret in Takigakure, known only to the village elders and the most elite ninja. After the bodies of the village elders had been found almost 70 years ago with gaping holes in their chests, the location of the Kinjutsu had been checked. At the time, no one knew how it had been found, just that its disappearance was a bad omen. The simple idea that Kakuzu, who wasn't in his cell and was the assumed culprit, had endowed the ability upon another person, let alone the fact that the former Takinin was still alive, made Daisuke's blood boil. After the exams, we confront the child, he informed Jiro quietly. I want to find out everything he knows about Kakuzu. Jiro nodded and straightened to continue observing the match. Daisuke kept his own weathered eye upon the boy in the arena. If he could lead them to Kakuzu, then Takigakure could reclaim its honor, and Daisuke could get vengeance for the tragedy levied upon his family so long ago. His grandfather's corpse haunted his vision all too frequently. You shall pay for your crimes, Kakuzu. Just you wait. LL. Naruto stared at Neji, currently suspended less than a foot off the ground by the unrelenting grip of Jiangu's tendrils. You know, Naruto began conversationally, judging by our current positions, I would think that you'd be having second thoughts about that whole fate thing. Seeing as how I've pretty much won. You haven't won yet, loser! Spat Neji. Oh? He switched his hands from the snake to the tiger. Jiangu, Kansifoma. The threads coiled a little tighter to free half a dozen ends. The 6 tendrils straightened into sharp spears, stabbing into Neji's biceps, sides, and legs, pinning him into the ground. He cried out as blood seeped into the bandages around his right leg. Naruto continued idly. I think that living in this safe, peaceful village has given you a false sense of just how strong you are. Belief in fate is a dumb notion, considering that you have no idea what exactly the rest of the world has in store for you. I think that I managed to prove that simply by defeating you here. As someone who's had more than one surprise thrown at me over my lifetime, I can guarantee that things aren't determined by something as fickle as fate. Find another dogma to bow down to. This match is over, said Genma. The winner is Shinobu of Amigakure. Please proceed to the medical bay for healing. Jiangu retracted its hold on Neji, hiding away again within Naruto's body. The blonde moved off the field and into the medical bay, where Hyuga began working on reopening his tenketsu. His opponent was brought in on a stretcher a minute later, and not too long after, Naruto was allowed to return to the viewing balcony. Come find me again in a few years. Maybe then you'll be worth something. LL. Fu's eyes flicked nervously in Gaara's direction as Shikamaru and Temari left the balcony for the arena. Ever since Naruto had left to fight his own match, the other Jinchuriki's cold, teal eyes had stared at her with unrelenting intensity. It was highly unnerving, especially considering that Gaara's opponent, Uchiha Sasuke, had yet to appear in the stadium, and if he didn't show, she would be the Sunanin's opponent after beating Ino. It was a fight she would prefer not to participate in. Fu sighed in relief when Naruto stepped up beside her, looking slightly worse for wear from his fight with Neji. He threw her a sidelong glance and a thumbs up. She returned the gesture with a small smile before turning to the fight just beginning in the arena, though her mind was far away, fastened on the boy next to her. The green-haired girl owed Naruto more than she felt she could repay. He had single-handedly brought her out from her own personal hell and into a life she was thoroughly enjoying. Of course, in comparison to the oppression she had faced back in Taki, that wasn't saying much. Simply put, Naruto was her savior. As far as her background went, Fu assumed that it was relatively normal by jinchuriki standards. It at least seemed somewhat comparable to what she knew of Naruto's pre-Kakuzu years, limited though those were. The really early years of her life were faded memories, small clips of a family that used to be content and complete. Her father had been a dark-haired shinobi from Takigaku's tribe of Earth, an accomplished ninja with equally dark eyes and a strong jaw. His wife was a brunette with soft green eyes, a civilian woman who had granted Fu her tan skin. How Fu had ended up with pale, minty green hair and orange eyes was a mystery, especially considering that she had checked her birth certificate when she was older to make sure that she wasn't adopted, but she shifted the blame to odd genetics and recessive traits. All she knew was that her phenotype made her unique within her home, and that despite her odd characteristics, her parents had cared for her. The first few years of her life had been simplistic. Her father was gone a lot, performing missions for the sake of his family's livelihood. Her mom had raised her patiently, with a gentle, guiding hand. There were no specific details, because time had rotted away all but the faces of the people whose DNA ran through her, but Fu did recall the day everything changed. At the age of 3, the 5 village elders had appeared on her family's doorstep and took the green-haired girl from the arms of her mother. They thanked the woman for her sacrifice and rushed Fu to a ceiling chamber, where the bleeding body of a male in his early 20s lay on a table. Fu's wide eyes took in the sight of the room they were in before she was placed on another table and strapped to it. Next to her, the man's body shuddered and a groan escaped his lips as a powerful chakra leaked from him. "The beast is trying to escape. We must perform the ceremony now," snapped the head elder. All Fu remembered after that was indistinct chanting and an oppressive pressure in the atmosphere before there was a glowing light, and then immense pain as she became Takigaku's third jinchuriki. From then on, Fu never looked at the hidden waterfall village in the same way. She had no idea of what had actually occurred, but it was enough that the first time she saw her parents after being taken away, a week later, when she had finally regained consciousness, her father had steered her mother in the complete opposite direction of her. It wasn't for another 4 months, a little after the first of many birthdays spent in solitude, that she discovered the exact reason why. Fu was playing on the ground in a vacant field when it happened. She was alone, which wasn't unusual considering the fact that no kids were willing to go near her anymore, and she preferred to be outdoors rather than cooped up inside the tiny living quarters she was provided. Her pointer finger swept through the dirt surrounding her, drawing thoughtless shapes which resolved themselves into crude images of her family. Wet spots appeared on the ground as tears fell from her eyes. Why? Why did they all leave me? As her emotions overflowed with her tears, a miniature dust tornado swirled into existence in front of her. Fu gasped in surprise, and the construct fell apart. What was that? Fu looked around for anyone in the nearby vicinity, but when the search revealed no one, she stared in wonder at the ground. Did I do that? Closing her eyes, the green-haired girl placed her hand flat to the earth and focused intently. She slowly raised her hand, thinking only of the tiny dust devils she had created. Several minutes passed before she dared to look at the result. Twirling in front of her was a perfect tornado of dust, no taller than 6 inches. Finally, rasped an irritated voice. And then everything disappeared. Fu found herself standing in the middle of an almost barren field, a small patch of wilted flowers a mere 10 feet in front of her. Towering far above her were bars of crystallized honey, arranged in a lattice-work grid shaped like a beehive, or a bird cage. Encaged behind the bars was a humongous yellow-green and blue beetle with spiked, armored plating for an exoskeleton and 7 lithe, whip-like tails extending from the base of its abdomen. 6 of those had wings fading from yellow to orange to red attached to them. Fu stumbled back a pace and fell on her rear, sending up a cloud of dust. What? A female, grumbled the insect in a deep, male voice. I hate females. Too many emotional issues, highly unbalanced and unpredictable. That's how my third host was, and a terrible plight that affair ended up being. Now, the males end up understanding how to associate with me. My second host used to be especially good at using my powers. He was so talented his brother stole my technique and became the knight aimed Sasuke. Ambitious men, both of them. Even this last fool was competent enough to wield my gift successfully, up until he took on that swordsman from Kiri and got cocky. Idiot. While the giant bug rambled to itself, Fu took the opportunity to get to her feet and take tentative steps toward the cage. She tried, quaking slightly in fright. What are you? There was a repetitive raspy, grating sound which echoed around the area, and she guessed that the creature was laughing. Of course, those foolish villagers don't like to get their hands dirty beyond the sealing ritual. Do the deed and then wipe their hands clean of the entire affair. The other two hosts from this village experienced the same treatment. Patience. He buzzed irritably. A proper introduction deserves the right timing. The creature seemed to draw itself upright, as if gathering every scrap of pride it possessed. I am the Nanabai no Kabutomushi, third most powerful Biju in existence. I desolated the plains of Iwagakure with dust storms generations before your birth, while the Shodai Hokage captured the Kyuubi and sealed it into his mate, arrogant Kitsune, got what it deserved. Whatever the giant creature in front of Fu was, because most of the references it was making was beyond her knowledge, it certainly seemed to talk a lot. I don't get it, she admitted. The Seven Tails grumbled something that sounded suspiciously like females. Of course not, you are young and ignorant. I can explain in further detail later if you'd like, but it will cost you. In the meantime, you should know that you have the ability to utilize what is colloquially known as Jinten. I would suggest practicing how to use it so you don't die like your predecessor. Jinten? I've only heard of. Of course you've only heard of the main five, interrupted the Nanabai. You're an insignificant human child, and combination elements are almost all rare bloodline traits. Regardless, IT exists. You should have proof enough of that already. Fu thought back to the miniature dust cyclone she had created outside. Okay. Thank you. There was a brief pause before the Nanabai's rasping laughter filled the open area. You're grateful to me? What a ridiculous notion. Perhaps you will make an interesting jinchuriki after all. The barren wasteland faded away to nothing before Fu was able to ask what a jinchuriki was. Crippling stomach pain and the Biju's mirth was all she remembered before blacking out. The years had seemed to bleed together after that as Fu taught herself both earth and wind-release chakra manipulation. She had discovered that Doton ninjutsu came much easier to her than did Futon, but she had assumed that that was because the man whom she shared genetics with, she refused to think of him as her father, specialized in the former. Combining the two into creating the dust release line of ninjutsu had been another issue altogether. Despite how amicable the Nanabai no Kabutomushi had seemed when they first met, Fu quickly came to understand that the Biju was not someone to get friendly with. The Seven Tails was a bit of a sadist and had a tendency to look down upon humanity. Fu had no issue with that. Her own view of humanity became more jaded by the day, except that the beetle seemed to regard her with only a little more deference than he did the rest of the populace. Then there was the fact that every time the Biju communicated with her, pain rippled through her belly in varying intensity. Apparently that was a side effect of the seal Takigakure employed, which was, according to the beetle, weaker than the seals used by Iwagakure. Even to this day, Fu had never inquired as to the Seven Tails' past or how he had that information, and the insect had never revealed any specifics of his own volition either. The other problem Fu had with the Nanabai was that he offered very little input on how to use Jinten ninjutsu, though she was thankful for the lack of pain from the seal. Fu had deduced for herself that it was a combination element based on earth and wind releases, but the combination aspect of the elemental chakras was far more difficult than she imagined. Taking into account the fact that she'd been forced to teach herself the theory and manipulate both elements, and with only a small amount of skill with wind chakra, Fu was impressed that she'd made much progress at all in her early years. Another obstacle had come in the form of the Taki elders, who had informed her that she would be attending the academy. When she tried protesting, for that would cut into training time, they told her that she contained the Nanabai no Kabutamushi, and that if she wasn't trained to become the village's weapon, then they would extract the beast and put it in someone else, thereby killing her. Left with no options, she'd been forced to bow into their wishes. The academy, as she found out, wasn't all bad. She learned all the fundamentals and basic facts of the school's major subjects, plus it gave her a stronger basis for the nature manipulation she was trying to accomplish. The best part came sometime when she was 9 years old, when the class was discussing history. Her class teacher was reviewing the previous generations of the Gojyo Gokko, the Hidden Waterfall's elite 5 elements, but one of the members was noticeably absent. Knowing that she would be ignored if she asked, the life of a jinchuriki, she had discovered, was quite unpleasant. Fu was quite pleased when one of her classmates pointed out the anomaly. The teacher scowled and proceeded into an hour-long tirade about a man named Kakuzu, his status in the village, and then his shocking betrayal during the First Shinobi World War. Whispers of the man considered Takigekyu's biggest traitor traveled throughout the classroom. Loyalty is a commodity easily molded in this village, buzzed the Nanabai in Fu's mind, echoing the girl's own sentiments. Fu nodded absently, ignoring the slight pain in her stomach. The expression on the teacher's face as he spoke of Kakuzu, it closely mirrored how the villagers tended to look at her. Something's not right. There's a piece of the story that's missing. Fu snuck into the library late that night after it closed, entering the section restricted to only ninja of Jonin rank or higher. Dust, she had discovered after learning how to combine earth and wind natures, was prominent enough in her surroundings that, given time, she could gather enough of it to manipulate for her own purposes. Levering open a window or providing a muffled landing, for instance. It took a lot of searching, but after 3 days of relatively sleepless nights, Fu finally found the information she was looking for. The document was a journal-cum-history book written during the time of the First Shinobi World War. She flipped through its pages, skimming the contents until Kakuzu's name caught her eye. Going back several pages, she began reading. The Shinobi World War has been going on for 7 years now. Kanahigakure has been successfully repelling the assaults of Kumogakure and Sunagakure, much to our surprise and chagrin. Thanks to the waterfalls hiding our village, Takigakure has managed to retain its neutrality in the war and watch as the self-proclaimed 5 great shinobi nations tear themselves apart. If Kanahigakure falls in this war, then perhaps Takigakure can take its place as the real 5th great shinobi nation. On a more personal level, Kakuzu is progressing along rather nicely. We have decided to create an elite branch of Jonin similar to Kirigakure's 7 shinobi swordsmen, in the eventuality that we are pulled into this global conflict. The Gojyo Gokko will be comprised of 1 ninja from each of the 5 founding tribes, the most powerful ninjutsu specialist of their own element. My grandson is training hard to fulfill the role of our Suiton expert. I believe he will exceed all of our expectations and do us proud. The entry was signed Takahashi Hiroki, head elder. The name didn't ring any bells to Fu, and she skipped a couple of pages and buried herself back in the journal. Whoever Takahashi Hiroki was, his updates were sporadic, for the entry the Nanabai Jinchuriki landed on was dated 16 months later. We don't know exactly what happened, but it appears as though my grandson will be tested sooner than expected. Kanahigakure has acquired the Kyubi no Yoko, said to have the capacity to create natural disasters with just a swing of one of its mighty tails. Combined with the Shodai Hokage's strength, as well as that of his brother, the Shinobi World War will no doubt swing in Kanahigakure's favor. We would prefer if that didn't happen. As a result, we have decided to send Kakuzu, the strongest of the Gojyo Gokko, on a mission to assassinate the Shodai Hokage. He will be departing tomorrow, and we send with him our hopes for success. Thought Fu-sensei skipped over that detail. She pushed a niggling suspicion to the back of her mind and moved on to the succeeding page, written only 5 days after the previous. My grandson has failed. He has returned from the land of fire wreathed in shame and on the brink of collapse. He was apparently overwhelmed by the Mokutan ninjutsu of the Shodai Hokage, a Kekii Genkai which we all gravely underestimated. Now we are forced to make a decision which scars my soul in ways I never conceived possible. As of today, Takahashi Kakuzu will be declared an official traitor of Takigakure. In light of my grandson's failure, we have no choice but to acknowledge that our strength doesn't even compare to that of the fledgling Konohagakure. To protect ourselves, Kakuzu will take the fall for the sake of the village, and we will claim that his actions were of his own volition. As I write this, my grandson now lies in the depths of our prisons, barely conscious. The other elders and I must meet to discuss our next options. Well, that explains more than it doesn't, Fu muttered. They framed Kakuzu to take the rap for the failed mission that they assigned in order to protect the village. Doesn't exactly paint Taki in a good light, does it? Mortals are so easy to manipulate, mused the Seven Tails. That was rhetorical. The jinchuriki shot back down the mental connection, grunting as the pain from the seal flared. The Biju's grating laughter echoed in her mind as she returned to the journal. Compared to the small, neat handwriting of the previous pages, the current entry was rushed, clearly written with a tremulous hand. Splotches of some dark liquid, blood she guessed, was spread liberally across the page, making the short passage somewhat illegible, though Fu could interpret some of the partially covered words. We danger. Kakuzu escaped, stole Jiangu, killed Seiji, took his heart, coming for Sore. The last word was left unfinished, and the largest stain of blood decorated the area immediately surrounding it. Fu guessed that Hiroki was trying to apologize for his actions against his grandson, but Kakuzu had killed him before he could finish. The entry raised more questions than it answered. How did Kakuzu escape? What was Jiangu? What did Takahashi Hiroki mean by took his heart? The remaining several pages were blank, though if the author died that was to be expected. She closed the journal and reshelved it before dragging her fingers along the spines of the rest of the books in that row. 8 shelves later, she found the section she was looking for. Fu considered how much time would have passed before the updates were made, then grabbed a previous edition of the bingo book dated 2 years after the end of the First Shinobi World War. Flipping through its contents, she quickly located the section dedicated to the smaller villages. Kakuzu's pupilless green eyes set in red mascara stared out at her from the book's faded pages. He wore a grayish-blue flak jacket with shoulder straps over a similarly colored long-sleeved shirt. Dark brown hair framed his face in messy strands. Fu peered intently at the photo, memorizing its every detail. Though the man was probably long dead, he had quickly become her idol. He had the courage to face the adversity the village lumped on him, and then shoved it right back in its face. He left a village which turned against him and successfully enacted his revenge upon it. It was everything Fu wished she could do but lacked the power and constitution to actually carry out. Basically, Kakuzu was everything Fu wished she could be. After that, the green-haired girl had buckled down in her training efforts, multiplying the effort she put into improving herself. Her thought had been that, perhaps if she tried hard enough, the day would come when she could follow in Kakuzu's footsteps. Over the next 31 months, Fu had focused on bending the dust element to her will, trying to find the absolute perfect balance between Futon and Doton which best utilized the combined chakra. Eventually, she had found what she felt was the right ratio, following it up by creating her own jinten techniques based off of many Suiton ones, which were quite common, considering the plethora of water in Takigakure and size of the tribe of water. Her skills had carried her all the way through the genin exam, where she graduated a year early, to when Naruto had taken her from the hell that was the hidden waterfall village. Riddled throughout her life were memories of solitude and pain, of abuse both physical and emotional suffered at the hands of her peers and their parents. Everything had seemed to disappear when Fu had looked up at Naruto's teacher and found those unforgettable green and red eyes glaring heated daggers into the blonde's own blue orbs. His clothes were different, radically so, and his personality seemed cruel and sadistic, but he was alive. It was all she could do to utter that first sentence, overcome by shock and a slight dose of fear. Fear of what he had lived through and experienced, fear of being rejected by her idol, for who knew what over half a century of bitterness and solitude did to a person? Those strange eyes turned on her, fierce with a mixture of loathing and intrigue. The gods were apparently smiling upon her, for she became Kakuzu's second pupil through an almost ironic twist of fate. How else could one explain the fact that Takigaku's most prized possessions belonged to scorned outcasts who had met through a single, common thread named Uzumaki Naruto? 3 months later found Naruto stuck training with Kisame, leaving Fu following her idol into the land of Earth for her own year of training. I am curious, Kakuzu began after several hours of walking in silence, what exactly the history books have told you about me. Fu thought back several months to when she had met Kakuzu and told him that she knew only of his reputation through Takigaku's history books. Well, to be perfectly honest, you're not actually in the history books. The mercenary remained silent, though Fu sensed he was waiting for her to continue. We were discussing the Gojo Goko, Kakuzu snorted, and she honestly didn't know if it was contemptuous or humorously mocking, and someone from the first generation was absent. The older Nuke could read between the lines. Those fools would ignore my accomplishments. She decided to skip the trivialities of her past searching endeavors. I was curious, so I snuck inside the library and found an old journal from Takahashi Hiroki. Conniving old man, seethed Kakuzu. It explains some things, she finished quietly after a moment. She didn't yet know enough about Kakuzu's personality or temperament to make accurate judgments on what he was thinking or how he was feeling, so she wanted to tread cautiously. Still, she was curious. But what's Jiangu? Kakuzu's arm lashed out, half his forearm attached to the rest of his limb by numerous black threads. Fu ducked to slap her palms to the ground and call up a wall of earth, knocking his forearm skyward at a slight angle. Humph, you are already learning. She grinned at the comment. This is the power of Jiangu, the technique hidden away by the elders upon the village's founding. They were afraid of the overwhelming power it offered its user. Kakuzu grinned wickedly, though his student couldn't see it. They were right to do so. Whoa, she breathed, that's awesome. Then she remembered something else from the journal. Does it allow you to steal hearts? That is a question you can ask Naruto when you next see him, he told her instead. I will be frank with you. While ninjutsu is a specialty of mine, Jinchun is not one of the primary chakra elements, and so I have little advice to give on the subject. However, if you are truly interested in becoming my protege, then I must impart upon you my expectations. He waited a moment, purposely building the tension before continuing. It is my desire that you become part of the motivation for Naruto to grow stronger. I don't really understand. Kakuzu sighed. My methods, as you will discover, are rather unconventional. I dislike dealing with children and ignorance, and more often than not I have my own agenda. Naruto was brought up in a cruel environmental, and then came under my care, which I am sure provided only some respite for his ego. He paused, as if to consider what he was saying, then admitted, a side effect of living by yourself for decades is that you come to care about no one but yourself. Making that person a caretaker to a young child is counterintuitive, though I have yet to hear a complaint from Naruto. However, I do not plan to change my methods. It is my belief that shinobi do not need to have their hands held throughout their growth, and each person should grow for his or her own merit rather than that of another. I am not a kind man by any stretch of the imagination, and it is reflected in my training methodology. Yet, despite my belittlement of his skills, Naruto has the potential to become one of the greatest shinobi the world has ever seen. It is my desire for you to be a stepping stone on his path, one which Naruto will strive to surpass, though I am certain that he is already stronger than you. Then why? Because I have made him believe that he is weaker than he is. And I will continue to do so through backhanded compliments and barbs at his strength and comparisons of your abilities until he realizes his own greatness and stops seeking my approval. His skills are spread thin across a plethora of topics, resulting in only short periods of devotion to areas that he can eventually grow to excel in. As a result, you must rise to the challenge and provide him with competition, an equal that will appear better than him and force him to question his abilities, and that begins here and now. The former Taki paused to allow his explanation to sink in. Is this acceptable? Why? She asked, and it wasn't anger at being used which laced the question, but shock at all the information she was receiving. If you're as cruel as you say you are, and you don't care about anyone else, what's the point of doing all of this? Because Naruto will become my legacy. Fu digested this answer, and then shrugged. Kakuzu's answer, while seemingly straightforward and almost simplistic, was too cryptic for her to fully understand his motives. Not that they mattered too much at this point. She decided that he would either explain them to her in due time, or she would figure them out by herself. Either way, she was helping her savior and learning from her idol. Life couldn't get much better. Let's go. A small tear appeared in Fu's white shirt as she belatedly dodged Kakuzu's attack, the unexpectedness of it successfully catching her off guard this time. Taki Ryu, Mizukiri no Yaiba, announced the bounty hunter. This technique almost single-handedly ensured my position in the Gojo Goko. You know how to use a sword, Fu noted. How did he form that weapon so quickly? You could have easily trained Naruto yourself. Why pass him on to someone different? I only know some measure of basic kenjutsu. In comparison to my knowledge, the tutelage of one of Kiri's 7 shinobi swordsmen will provide an opportunity for Naruto to excel in swordsmanship. Kakuzu disappeared, and before Fu could even react, he was behind her, water-cutting sword held to her throat. Additionally, we needed to have this conversation far removed from prying ears. Naruto can never know about any of this. He must be pushed to his limit, and then over it, without ever discovering who stirs the pot. If that sounds too difficult for you, he leaned in so that he could speak directly into her ear. I will kill you. Fu tried to steady her breathing, exhaled a little too hard, and felt a bead of blood run down her neck. You drive a hard bargain. She tried to make her voice sound light, but it was hard to do when a ruthless killer, regardless of her opinion of him, had her at his mercy. But this is all rather unnecessary. My loyalty lies with you and Naruto. And if this is for my benefit, for Naruto's benefit, then who am I to argue? The sword was withdrawn, and Fu sighed in relief. You are an amusing girl, Kakuzu stated after a moment of thought. Let us commence with your training. Things continued smoothly from that point, well, as smoothly as they could when Kakuzu was the tutor. Fu learned better through practical exercise as opposed to theory and book learning, so as she and Kakuzu traveled around the lands of earth and wind, as well as some of the territories west of them. The bounty hunter taught her both his taijutsu style and a repertoire of suiten ninjutsu which she converted to jintan. The day before she and Kakuzu were supposed to reunite with Naruto, Fu asked the Nukenin point-blank what he meant a year ago by using her to motivate Naruto. I know that we had this conversation before we began training, but I still don't get your plan to use me to make Naruto stronger. She half expected him to not answer, too withdrawn even after a year of just the two of them traveling together to explain things to her properly. To her pleasant surprise, he deigned to respond. Psychology, he began after a pause of consideration, is an intriguing area of study. You would be surprised at how easily the brain is fooled into believing something simply through the subtle prods of actions and words. Manipulating the mind is an easy task if you know which buttons to push. Meaning? Fu knew that Kakuzu tended to delve into long-winded explanations, but she was willing to listen if it answered what his goal was in a way that she would understand. He paused, then continued. For example, Naruto was forced to lead a life of solitude and exile when he was younger. As a result, he grew up desiring recognition from the people in his surroundings, doing anything to achieve their acknowledgement. Now the only person he has to impress, to find acceptance from, is me. So whether it is a conscious or subconscious desire, and I am of the opinion that it is the former, part of a psychological condition known as traumatic bonding, Naruto will seek my approval, my recognition, at any cost. Because of this, psychologically speaking, Naruto's mind is fragmented. Are you saying that he's crazy? No, sighed Kakuzu, massaging the bridge of his nose to stave off his temper. There is a stark difference between insanity and cognitive uncertainty. Fu made as if to say something, but her teacher cut across her. Naruto does not possess confidence in his own strength because I have never recognized it, never accepted the breakthroughs he makes in his training. So he will grow stronger in an effort to prove himself to me. And you know this, how? We are similar. Deciding that she wouldn't get a better answer than that, Fu asked, so, if you're focusing on him, what am I doing here? Do you listen to anything I say? Kakuzu demanded irately. Did you not comprehend a word of what I told you before we began this venture? He fought the urge to strangle the green-haired girl. You are a stepping stone on his path to greatness. Even though he is undoubtedly stronger than you. If he's stronger than me, I don't understand my purpose. Kakuzu lashed out with his arms, threads wriggling out and ensnaring Fu in their grasp before she could react. They retracted and brought her up his face, his fierce green eyes boring holes into orange ones. Shut up and listen, girl. Naruto has been training for many years in a wide variety of areas. He possesses a natural talent for Futon ninjutsu, an ancient kinjutsu allowing him to currently access Doton and Suiton techniques, and eventually the other elemental chakras as well, a summoning contract lost for half a century, and now kenjutsu. On the other hand, your skills are limited to my own taijutsu and jinton, plus its separate components, and while you can utilize both earth and wind chakra, the former in quite an impressive manner, your knowledge of Futon ninjutsu is severely limited. But this works into my plan. While you have fewer fields of expertise, you have more successfully mastered yours in your time using them than Naruto has had to understand any singular talent of his own. I am banking on this difference to impact Naruto's mentality. As he is now, he knows that he cannot compare to me. However, if his own peer, a fellow jinchuriki, appears to outdo him in such a short amount of time, it will force him to reassess his own skills, causing him to rise to the challenge to beat you. As I said before, psychology is a powerful weapon. He released the Nanabi's jailer, allowing the black tentacles of Jiangu to slither back under his skin. Even if it is untrue, a mind as splintered as Naruto's will accept what is force-fed to it. If you focus on upstaging him with your artistry and Doton and Jinten moves, then I will have the material needed to push him over the edge, to drive him into becoming the best that he can possibly be. You are a means to an end, although you, too, have the potential to become great. Knowing what I know now, I would expect no less from a jinchuriki. But your needs are secondary to that of Naruto's growth. He turned with a swish of his cloak and kept walking. It is not yet time for you to understand the specifics of the why, merely to play your part in the how. Low enough that Fu couldn't hear, he muttered, someone needs to carry on what I have started. Uzumaki Naruto will become my legacy by my hand, whether or not he is aware of it. Naruto. True to her word, Fu never uttered a word to her fellow jinchuriki about anything that Kakuzu had told her, partly because she feared what the man would do to her if he found out, and he would find out, but also because it was working. She had started paying close attention to the strategy Kakuzu employed to motivate Naruto, from his brusque dismissals to the compliments recognizing Fu's skill but not the blonde's. Strange as it seemed, over the course of the Chunin exams, Fu had seen Naruto double and redouble his efforts during training, his determination to impress Kakuzu and surpass her driving him to become better, stronger, more talented. Just looking at his fight with Neji was proof of how far Naruto had come in such a short time. Granted, his training had been temporarily placed under Kakuzu's watchful and strict eyes in order to properly prepare him for the upcoming battle with Orochimaru's men, but his progress was still nothing to sneeze at. Considering his wide array of different aptitudes, especially in comparison to her more meager skill set, as Kakuzu had pointed out, it was nothing short of amazing that Naruto had gotten as far as he had with each one. Fu had no doubt that he surpassed her as far as sheer ability went, even if some of his technique and expertise was a tad rawer. There was always room for improvement, though. Despite his victory against Neji, impressive considering he had chosen to go toe-to-toe with a taijutsu specialist using taijutsu, even if he had won with Jiangu, Fu had little doubt that Naruto's performance would still be criticized by Kakuzu at first opportunity, including a violent telling off for using Jiangu. Still, it was a little shocking to discover how good a mastermind the former Taki was, almost as surprising as how well Naruto fell into the role Kakuzu predicted for him. Perhaps the blonde was as psychologically broken as Kakuzu said he was. The fight's over, Naruto mentioned quietly, breaking Fu from her reverie. She looked down, spying the sand kunoichi and the konoha standing mere feet apart. Both of them raised one hand, and several seconds passed before the proctor announced that Temari was the winner. Interesting, mulled Naruto. Fu opened her mouth to ask for an elaboration, but Genma's voice broke through her question, saying that the match between Uchiha Sasuke and Sabaku no Gaara was next. Uchiha-san has yet to show up, intoned Shino. Fu's attention switched to the Aburame, absently noting that Neji had returned to the balcony, as the bug user turned to face Sai. As his teammate, I presume that you would know something of his whereabouts. Sai shrugged, pasting a smile on his face. Kakashi-sensei took him away for private tutoring. I'm sure Sasuke-san will show up soon. I hope he doesn't, spoke Gaara, who had yet to move towards the stairs. The Ichibi Jinchuriki shot Fu a hungry look which caused her to shiver. If Sasuke didn't appear for his match, then it was only a matter of time before the Sunanin's opponent would be. He's here, announced Naruto. Everyone else looked to the arena, where Sasuke and Kakashi had just appeared in a swirl of leaves. Gaara grunted and moved to the stairwell as Fu watched him go. The green-haired girl breathed a low sigh of relief when he was no longer visible. You okay? Naruto whispered. Yeah, she breathed. Good thing the Uchiha showed up right on time. He nodded. Well, let's see what the two of them can do. Naruto, even as someone who experienced and witnessed the powers granted by a Biju on a daily basis, would admit that Gaara's abilities were impressive. Upon the start of the fight, his sand caught Sasuke's thrown shuriken and morphed into a Sunabunshin. Sasuke dispersed it with a couple of well-placed hits, and Naruto found himself equally impressed by the Uchiha's skill as he disappeared and reappeared behind the Sunanin to land a punch to his jaw. The blonde was forced to admit that Kakuzu's assessment of Gaara's abilities were accurate to a fault. Sasuke continued to pummel his opponent with taijutsu, cracks appearing in Gaara's sand armor as the Uchiha's overwhelming speed and power completely outclassed the redhead's defense. Gaara's taijutsu abilities are about as existent as my own skill in genjutsu, Naruto concluded. Kakuzu was right. Not that that was overly surprising, just frustrating to admit. Then it stopped mattering. The sand genin enclosed himself in a sphere of sand. His opponent's fist smashed into it, but nothing happened. An eye formed above the sphere, and though Sasuke tried attacking it again and again, causing spikes of sand to shoot out at him, there was no change in the situation. On the other side of the viewing balcony, Temari started trembling. What will you do now, Uchiha Sasuke? Muttered Naruto. As if in response, Sasuke backed away and ran high up the arena's wall, going through a series of hand signs and then grasping his left arm with his right. Blue-white lightning crackled in the palm of his left hand in an impressive display of nature manipulation for a genin. Then he charged, lightning jutsu digging into the wall as he moved in a straight path towards Gaara's sphere of sand. Is that even going to work? The blonde wondered. While Gaara's automatic defense could be beaten with sheer speed and his armor was able to be cracked, the shell that he had erected had seemed impervious to Sasuke's attacks up until that point. Then again, normal sand is composed of some form of earth, and Raiton is strong against Doton, so maybe. The Uchiha thrust his hand forward. The lightning attack split the sand like a knife going through hot butter. There was a brief 5 seconds of silence as Sasuke stood there with his arms shoved halfway into the sphere. Then, "My blood!" screamed Gaara. About half a dozen different things happened almost simultaneously in the split second following the boy's blood-curdling cry. Gaara's protective sphere exploded outward in a shower of sand, blasting Sasuke backwards and sending him skidding along the ground. Smoke engulfed the area where the Kazekage and the Hokage were sitting, galvanizing several ANBU Black Ops hidden in the crowd into action. Temari leapt from the viewing balcony and glided to the battlefield on her fan as two other figures, Kankuro and the Sand Siblings Sensei, guest Naruto, joined her from the stands. Ninja dressed in the uniforms of the Hidden Sand and the Hidden Sound leapt from their seats and began engaging ninja of the Hidden Leaf in battle. White feathers obscured Naruto's vision and his eyelids suddenly felt heavy. Genjutsu, he mumbled. He tried to bring his hands up to form the seal to dispel the technique, but his arms felt like lead, sluggish with sleep, and he swayed dangerously on the spot. Then the feeling disappeared, and Naruto blinked himself back to awareness. Fu's pointer and middle fingers were held to his forehead and her eyes were closed. She had disrupted his chakra for him, breaking the illusion. Thanks. Fu nodded once before both undercover genin found themselves frozen in place, a buzzing sound filling the air around them. Shikamaru was bent with one knee on the ground, his hands in the seal for his clan's trademark jutsu. Shino stood next to him, his Kakaches swarming around him in an angry black cloud. Neji, Ino, and Sai flanked them, all of them prepared for combat in their own way. "What are your intentions here, Ainin?" demanded Neji. Naruto sighed. "If you're asking if we're part of this apparent invasion of your village, the answer's no. Do you see any Ainin attacking?" The Konoha genin exchanged looks. "Seriously?" asked Fu. "Don't you have anything better to do than detain us?" "I'm pretty Sasuke is following after Gaara and his teammates, who are part of the force attacking your village. And your Hokage is in trouble." They all turned around in time to see Sasuke disappear over the arena wall. A purple barrier had been erected around the roof of the main watchtower where the two Kages had been watching the matches. "She has a point," Shikamaru stated, releasing the shadow imitation technique. The two jinchuriki each held up a hand in farewell. Later, they chirped in unison. In a swirl of wind and dust, they were gone. "Perhaps it would have been wiser to interrogate them a bit more," Shino mused, shifting in a way that suggested he was looking at Ino. No one said anything to this, but Sai pulled out his scroll and summoned an ink bird. He jumped onto the animated creature and flew off in the direction Sasuke had disappeared. The four remaining genin nodded and then followed him out, leaping from the balcony and running across the arena and over the wall top. Naruto and Fu reappeared from their respective shunshin in the arena far from the fight between Gunma and the Sand sibling sensei. "Shouldn't we be finding Kakuzu and Haro?" asked the Nanabai Jinchuriki. "In this mess?" Naruto retorted. "Konoha, Suna, and Oto are all fighting, and we don't even know where they are." He paused, scanning the crowd in a vain attempt to find the two males. "No, it's better to stay somewhere obvious and let them find us." "Good," stated an older voice, "because that makes it more convenient for us." Naruto and Fu whirled around to find an elderly man with a cane standing behind them. He was flanked by 5 ninja wearing the standard Takigakure Jonin outfit, the fifth one possessing a porcelain mask with the hidden waterfall emblem on the forehead and a blue and light blue overlapping wave pattern decorating the bottom portion. Shinobu of Amigakure, correct? My name is Arakawa Daisuke, and I'm curious to know where you got that most intriguing ability you displayed against the Hyuga child. The man's tone was pleasant enough, but Naruto knew that it was just a front. "Kekei Genkai?" he offered. Allowed Daisuke, and yet you have no clan affiliation. How curious. He paused in a way that suggested he was thinking over what Naruto had just told him, considering the likelihood of such a scenario. "Do you know what I think?" There was a loud explosion as a giant 3-headed snake broke through the wall surrounding Konoha. To the blonde, it was like the herald of his own doom. "I think that you're in possession of an ancient technique that belongs to Takigakure." Daisuke looked like he wanted to say more, but his eyes darted to the side and widened upon seeing Fu. "Oh shit," thought Naruto, mentally preparing for the worst, "we're so screwed." "You," hissed the elder, "how are you?" He took a moment to recompose himself before turning his full attention back to Naruto. "Apparently you possess more than one secret of ours. Capture them alive," he ordered his guards. "I want to know everything they know about Kakuzu. Today is the day we reclaim both of Takigakure's lost prizes." Naruto and Fu moved to stand back to back as the 5 waterfall jonin formed a loose circle around them. The sounds of clashing kunai resounded in the auditorium, accentuated by the shouts of fighting ninja and the thuds of bodies hitting walls and stadium seats. Naruto glanced at the purple barrier, where he presumed Orochimaru and the Sandaime Hokage were locked in a deadly fight for their lives. "I'll give Orochimaru this," he commented to Fu. "He sure knows how to create a scene." And then, amidst the chaos of the invasion, their adversaries pounced. Chapter 11: Confrontations. For as intelligent as Orochimaru is renowned to be, one would think he would have imparted some of his genius upon his subordinates, groused Kakuzu. Having already activated Doton, Domu, the man's fist easily plowed through the chest of an attacking Otonin, killing him instantly. Haro, standing mere feet from him, hit several pressure points in another ninja's leg, causing him to recoil in pain. Kakuzu took the opportunity to loose his arm at the man, the threads of Jiangu burrowing under his skin and pulling out his heart. "Idiotic Otonin," he snarled, more threads ripping through his shirt from the shoulders and spearing two leaping opponents in midair. Can they not see that we have no affiliation with Konohagakure? Harrow shrugged, unsheathing the twin katana kiba from his back. He channeled a small amount of lightning chakra through them, just enough to paralyze the enemy trying to sneak up on the duo long enough for Kakuzu to kill him. Despite holding several soldier pills, something he preferred not to rely on but found necessary given the uncertainty of the inevitable battle ahead, in which he would rather not become a liability due to chakra exhaustion, the cobalt-haired boy was trying to conserve as much chakra as possible. At least they're not particularly strong, he offered. Another point against the Sannin. Konohagakure is renowned as one of the strongest of the 5 great shinobi nations. Sending the second string in to fight its populace, whether a large quantity is asleep or not, was a foolish endeavor. The bounty hunter had a point. All over the stadium, Konoha's elite ninja were fighting back against the combined forces of the sand and sound. Harrow supposed that the invasion would have been more of a success had Sabaku no Gaara actually been able to play his role properly, whatever that was. As it was, the might of Orochimaru's village in conjunction with the hidden sand was proving to be more of a nuisance than an actual threat. That held especially true when your partner was an S-class nuke with a powerful kenjutsu at his disposal. Enough! Roared Kakuzu, black tendrils multiplying from seemingly nowhere to ensnare a handful of enemy ninja. And a powerful temper. It certainly worked to their advantage that Kakuzu had rage issues, especially considering that they were the only 2 conscious ninja in their section of the stands. It made them an obvious target, if a rather senseless one, since defending Konoha wasn't on their list of priorities. Good thing Kakuzu's on our side. He's taking out most of these guys single-handed. Several snapping sounds from Kakuzu's direction brought Harrow back to attention in time to duck a kick from a Chunin. He crossed his 2 swords together so that the tips touched the man's legs and sent enough lightning through his body to fry his brain. The boy glanced down to see 2 small figures, one possessing Fu's telltale mint green hair, engaged in battle with 5 other figures, a 6th person standing nearby. Hey, Aizo-san. Stop calling me that, Kakuzu snapped. We no longer need to keep these ridiculous aliases. Our cover is no longer important. Alright. Well, Kakuzu, I think Naruto and Fu are in trouble. The mercenary's head twisted so quickly, Harrow was surprised that he didn't hear the crack of vertebrae. Kakuzu's unusual eyes narrowed at the sight in the arena, and the rain rebel heard him mutter, "That damned little shit," as a Chunin tried to lodge a kunai into Kakuzu's spine. The knife hit the hardened skin of Kakuzu's earth spear technique, and the sand shinobi's eyes widened in surprise. They glazed over in death as the former Taki grabbed him with threads from his shoulder and ripped out his heart. We need to finish this quickly, Kakuzu stated seriously. Harrow wasn't entirely sure why the older male suddenly sounded so dire now of all times, but he wasn't about to question it. If you say so. Unbeknownst to the boy, Kakuzu had noticed a detail about the ninja assaulting the 2 jinchuriki that Harrow wouldn't have been able to identify. That mask. He knew that mask. Nearly a lifetime ago it had belonged to him, a symbol of pride for the handful skilled enough to earn it. His 2 pupils, talented though they had proven themselves to be, weren't prepared for one of Takigakure's 5 elements, no matter how pathetic the waterfall soldiers were. Once I dispose of these gnats, I will show those fools the true mettle of the Gojyo Goko. LL. Sai leaped to the ground from his bird as 4 different sand jonin launched a wall of wind at him. Ink succumbed to gravity as his drawing was destroyed, falling down in black puddles around him. The opposing ninja alighted near him. Take him out, ordered one of them, and the other 3 moved forward to do the man's bidding. They froze mid-movement, and from behind him, Sai heard a muttered Kagemain no Jutsu complete. Buzzing filled the air as insects descended upon one of the jonin, and Sai capitalized on the moment by binding the other 2 with hastily drawn ink snakes. The remaining Chunin's face contorted into a frown. Sai glanced behind him, confirming that Shikamaru, Shino, Ino, and Neji had arrived as backup. The shadow user was on one knee, and as the ink user watched, his shadow disconnected from the 3 enemies and shot towards the 4th. The Chunin backpedaled away from it, waiting until Shikamaru gave up trying to bind him. Anara, he noted, eyes darting to the other boys, a Hyuga, an Aburame, and 2 others. The Jonin shook his head. 5 genin catching us unaware. How sad. Still, it won't happen again. It is 5 against 1, stated Shino in his bland voice. His Kikai moved from the fallen form of their target to begin surrounding the last man. Whether we are genin or not, we have felled your comrades. True, admitted the Jonin. Then he whistled, and a score of men wearing the clothing of Suna and Oto appeared from the surrounding trees and bushes. And now you're outnumbered and outclassed. Sai formed a loose ring with his peers. Though his rank was being underestimated, the Jonin had a point. As a member of Root, Sai was sent on mostly solo missions, after his brother had died anyway, where the odds of running into multiple opponents, let alone the number currently facing him and his comrades, were slim to none. The mission to track Sasuke was going to have to be put on hold temporarily, at least until they could bypass this current obstacle. Ino, Shikamaru prompted. Right, returned the blonde, before forming the specific hand sign of her clan and shooting her consciousness into one of their bound targets. This will still be troublesome, Shikamaru muttered as Sai released the captive Ino had taken over. And then there was no time for thinking. LL. He's mine to kill, rasped Gaara, clutching his head with a hand. Get in my way and I'll kill you too. Sasuke watched as a protesting Temari and a nervous Kankuro stepped away from their brother. Gaara's teal eyes were locked onto his form, and Sasuke felt inexplicably apprehensive. You have the same eyes as I do, the eyes, filled with hatred and death, that long for strength. It was what Gaara had said to him while he was training with Kakashi before the Chunin exam finals. Somehow, the words seemed much more appropriate and intimidating when those eyes were staring him down, the promise of death looking him in the face, and no elite Jonin around to defend him. Then death changed form. Sand coalesced around Gaara's face and right arm. A massive clawed limb, as long as he was tall, seemed to grow from the gathered particulates, inscribed with blue, vein-like designs and tipped with black claws instead of fingers. The redhead's face was affected as well, the strangely patterned sand overtaking his right eye, down the side of his nose, and around his mouth. Drool leaked out from the orifice in a representation of Gaara's insatiable bloodlust, and his normally teal eye was now a demonic golden yellow with a black, 4-pointed star for an iris. Come, Uchiha Sasuke! Let me prove my existence! He shot forward, and Sasuke was momentarily taken aback by the other boy's increased speed. The Uchiha jumped to the next tree as Gaara crashed through the spot he had just vacated, splintering the plant's trunk. He screamed his rage to his surroundings as his prey hunkered behind a separate tree, steadying his breathing. Do you fear me, Uchiha Sasuke? Mother is thirsty, she wants your blood. Sasuke's eyes bled into the crimson of the Sharingan as he went through the hand signs for the Chidori. Never again would he allow himself to be considered a coward, not after that man had destroyed everything he had once held dear. He was no longer a defenseless academy student, quivering in fright in the shadow of his family's murderer. He was an Uchiha, the elite of the elite, and he wasn't going to bow down to some other ninja, especially one whom he had previously held an advantage over. The Leaf Genin stepped out from behind his perch, using the bough as a fulcrum and propelling himself towards Gaara. Laughing maniacally, the redhead mimicked the charge, monstrous arm extended forward. Lightning split Gaara's sand limb as easily as it had punched a hole in the defensive shell earlier, and Sasuke smirked. Gaara screamed again, though Sasuke detected a tinge of masochism in the sound. Pain! Gaara screeched. This is why I must kill you, to end the life of the person who causes me pain. The sand from his shoulder merged with that from his gourd, sprouting into a long, thick tail with the same blue, vein pattern and black-tipped spikes as his arm. Using the Sharingan, Sasuke managed to see Gaara's reckless dive in almost slow motion, the Sunanin somehow moving even faster than before despite his added bulk. Gaara's clawed hand exploded in different directions, and the Uchiha only managed to dodge thanks to his Kekkai Genkai. He shot a great fireball at the boy, but it dispersed upon contact with the sand. The only thing that affects him is the Chidori, he realized, and I'm already at my limit. Damn it, what can I do? An image of Itachi, his older brother, the murderer of his clan, flashed through his mind. You lack hatred, intoned the ghost of his past, the single reason for his existence, and that makes you weak. I am not weak, he growled. Orochimaru's curse seal burned brightly, spreading its flame-like marks across the entire left side of his body and giving him the strength to activate a third Chidori. Ha! He cried, charging forward again. This time, he cleaved off Gaara's entire arm just below the shoulder, ending on a tree branch just behind the boy. He smirked once at his success and then collapsed face first where he stood, drained of chakra from the cursed seal. Gaara let out another burst of insane laughter as his sand arm reconnected with his body. Using his tail, he jumped towards the fallen genin, claws extended in a grab. The digits wrapped around the Uchiha's body and hoisted him into the air, where he could clearly see the Sunanin's lolling tongue and insane, golden eyes. Goodbye, Uchiha Sasuke. The sand covered the Konohanin's head and compacted. There was no sound for a long moment. Temari and Kankuro were frozen in shock, waiting to see if the raven-haired boy would somehow appear and retaliate. A trickle of blood leaked out from the sand casing, and Gaara began to laugh shrilly. He's dead, he crowed. Finally! So absorbed in his personal celebration, he was caught unaware by the explosion which blew off half his sand arm. It reformed quickly, but unable to find the source of this new enemy, Gaara screamed his rage to the sky. Out of sight from the sand siblings were two figures. One was crouched on a thick tree limb suspended a little over 50 feet above the ground. Underneath the straw hat upon his head, he fiddled with a complex scope affixed to his left eye. Below him sat a stooped person, the black robes, mouthcloth, and conical hat keeping his hunched figure completely concealed. So that's the power of the Ichibi, stated the person in the tree. You better not take forever, replied the other figure gruffly. You know how much I hate waiting, Deidara. The first ninja threw off his hat, revealing long blonde hair held erect in a partial ponytail and lengthy bangs which completely hid his left eye and the scope from view. No worries, Sasori no Dana, HM. He withdrew his other hand from a pouch attached to his waist, opening the appendage to reveal a mouth in the center of the palm. It opened to spit out a small off-white bird, which the blonde tossed into the air. His hands came together to form the sign of the ram, expanding his creation with a small application of chakra into a size that could carry humans. He jumped atop the creature with the ease born of practice. This fight'll be just like my art, a fleeting piece of work. With that, he wheeled off towards his target, giving Sasori no time to retort. Impudent brat. His impatience will get him killed. Sasori shuffled off, using the path his partner had flown off on as his general heading. If he dies, I'll have to complete the mission myself. I wonder how the Sandaime Kazekage would fare against the Ichibi Jinchuriki. LL. Fighting Jonin was far more challenging than taking on other genin or even Chunin, even if said Jonin were from a smaller hidden village like Takigakure. It shouldn't have surprised Naruto as much as it did. Standards for rising to Jonin were probably high no matter what village a ninja belonged to, so they would obviously have to be more skilled than a mere genin, even if Naruto's and Fu's talents were actually around Chunin level. Still, they were being targeted by the nation which had produced Kakuzu, though the man would certainly deny how influential the hidden waterfall had been in building his current strength, and Fu, people Naruto respected for their power. It at least partially explained why he and the Nanabai Jinchuriki were having trouble getting the edge over the 5 Jonin. That and they were outnumbered. No wonder Kakuzu likes hunting bounties removed from civilization. It's a lot easier when there are no other distractions to interfere with the kill. And it helped more when the enemies weren't coordinating their assault in a tailored format to bring him down. Katan, Hozenka no Jutsu. Futon, Repusho. Shit! Fueled by wind chakra, the small fireballs swelled to uncontrollable and unavoidable sizes. Confronted with the approaching flames, Naruto quickly laced his fingers together into the seal of the dragon, arms extended out and pinkies pointed down. Jiangu, Shirudo Foma! He shouted. Threads burst forth from his sleeves, twining together into a solid web in front of his body. 2 of the 5 fireballs struck the barrier squarely, dispersing upon contact but burning away the tips of some of the threads. The third went just a little too wide and missed him completely. He jumped back, allowing the fourth to hit the ground where he had just been standing, and the fifth clipped the side of the threads, passing by Naruto's arm close enough that the blonde felt its heat. The shielding form was the latest manipulation out of the handful Naruto had thus far invented with the Kenjutsu, inspired by Jiangu's resiliency to most outside attacks and Kakuzu's Domu, before he had fully understood the Earth Spear technique. It was more convenient than the ninjutsu because the boy could more easily access and control it, but revealing it in a fresh battle would probably forfeit any advantage of surprising an opponent with the threads, or so he theorized. A practical application had yet to be tested. Since he was being targeted because of the forbidden technique, though, he didn't see the harm in fully utilizing it to his advantage. Something burning caused Naruto's nose to twitch in irritation, and he looked down to see that the last burst of flames which had only grazed the makeshift shield had caught the edge of his scarf. Naruto unwound the cloth from around his neck, throwing it away with a curse. Honestly, why do they wear something that could so easily kill them? He complained aloud. Suetun, Haran Bansho. Suddenly, the flaming material was the least of the jinchuriki's problems. A deluge of water fell from the sky and battered him down, stifling him under its weight. Pounding at his skull, the liquid forced Naruto's mental processes to slow, and it took him an extra moment to figure a way out of the torrent. He silently activated Dotun, Mogirigaku no Jutsu to slip underground, the water following him as a trickle instead of a veritable flood. There was no telling how much time he had to build a strategy before he was found, but he knew that it wouldn't be long. The waterfall Jonin were well organized, he would give them that. They had split up the two jinchuriki upon the elder's attack command, a synchronized pair wielding Katan and Futon affinities cornering Naruto. The Kyuubi's jailer grudgingly admitted that it was a smart move, since wind only enhanced fire, which nullified any of his own wind release techniques, if they knew he actually specialized in them, and boosted their firepower. From his periphery, the blonde had caught Fu fighting at a massive disadvantage against Raiten and Doton specialists. Then there was the masked Suetun expert. He bounced between the two battles, capitalizing on every opening either Jinchuriki presented and defending his comrades against any counterattacks. He seemed to be on a different level than the other four, a caliber enough above them that he was able to read into whatever plans the blonde made. It made Naruto glad that the man wasn't focusing his complete attention upon either himself or Fu, because otherwise either might have still been fighting. If the Sudan-using Jonin wasn't around to interfere with his retaliations, Naruto thought that he could at least do something against the pair of Taki assaulting him. Following his victory against Neji, his confidence in his own skill had risen. Though beating the duo was questionable, because all things held constant, he was still sorely outranked and being double-teamed. He felt that some of his endeavors could have been more successful than what he was currently experiencing. Also playing against him was the fact that they had seen his battle against the Hyuga, making them wary of getting within their presumed range of Jiangu. He decided to look at his present scenario as a potential worst-case situation for the life of a shinobi, bounty hunter included, Gaara. Time's up. He popped up from the hiding like a mole technique, tanto drawn and ready to cut down one of his opponents with applied wind chakra and subterfuge. Suetun, Mizutepo, called a voice, and Naruto wasn't even able to blink before a powerful stream of liquid caught him in midair. He hit the ground hard, tumbling head over ass from the force of the ninjutsu. Sopping wet blonde bangs tickled his forehead, and Naruto felt his scalp, concluding that the covering he had worn for the entirety of the Chunin exams had been blown off. Not that I need it anymore, anyway, he muttered, blowing the strands away with an upset huff. Giving the gesture up as futile when the tips fell back down, he shook his head like a dog, ridding his hair of the excess moisture. He gave the masked man a dirty look. "You know, I'm really tired of you," he stated. "Then perhaps we should end this," returned the Taki. He performed several hand seals, manipulating a geyser of water to burst from the earth and form a concave shell around Naruto. The liquid almost entirely surrounded the blonde, even covering the top and forming a thin layer beneath his feet, leaving only a 2-foot wide opening in the front. Naruto tried touching the barrier to manipulate it, surprised to find it solidified but not frozen. "What the hell?" he murmured. Then the tag team Jonin appeared in the slim space in front of him, both preparing jutsu. Blue orbs widened minutely, and he tried activating a defensive water technique Kisame had taught him: Suetun, Sujin Hiki, water release, water encampment wall, only for the liquid to, once again, prove unresponsive. Son of a... His curse broke off as the masked Takinin's head swiveled to the stands and back, sensing a portent of things to come? Naruto wondered, and the other two ninja finished their seals. Katan, Gokakyu no Jutsu. Futon Kaze no. There was a loud crack as a giant man appeared behind the wind user and grabbed his head, twisting it with one fluid motion. The Jonin fell to the earth, motionless, and Naruto found he honestly couldn't remember a time when he was as grateful to see Kakuzu as he was at that moment. Then he remembered the giant fireball still bearing down on him. Kakuzu apparently had that covered too. 3 hand seals, a punch to the ground, and a grunt of Dotun, Rakutoreru, prefaced the eruption of a jagged mass of boulders on a path perpendicular to the fiery attack. The conflagration struck the rocks, scattering against the defensive maneuver. Naruto heaved a sigh of relief. Thanks, Ka. Save your own miserable hide next time, snapped Kakuzu, turning to show the blonde his ire. The jinchuriki was momentarily taken aback, not by the words, but by the fact that Kakuzu didn't have anything disguising his face. Both the rebreather and the full head covering were gone, revealing dark, shoulder-length hair, his half-stitched mouth, and a square jaw. Arakawa Daisuke took advantage of the interruption to step forward with assistance from his cane. Takahashi Kakuzu, he began, voice a sibilant caress, hatred lacing the name. Do not call me that, seethed the mercenary. I renounced that name when your damnable village left me to rot. You will die here today, continued the waterfall elder as if Kakuzu had not interrupted, voice becoming gleeful, in reparation for the sins which befell our village because of you. Jiro, take him out. Kakuzu let out a derisive bark of laughter at that. Naruto, watching the scene play out with morbid fascination, briefly toyed with the idea that Kakuzu was afflicted with some sort of bipolar or multiple personality disorder. His mood shifted with disturbing alacrity. You think that one of your pathetic lackeys can kill me? In case you were unaware, that mask used to be mine. He cannot defeat me with skills that I have had decades to master. But come, he motioned, I need a warm-up before my real target. Let us see what the current Nami no Kodo of the Gojyo Goko can do against the original. Naruto wondered if part of the reason Kakuzu had renounced his affiliation with Taki was because the village came up with names as poor as the surging started looking around, a sudden realization occurring to him. If Kakuzu's here, then where's Haro? A bolt of lightning, all but invisible if he hadn't actively been searching for something, crossed in front of Naruto's vision. Long and thin in the shape of a lance, the elemental weapon speared into one of the men fighting Fu. He dropped like a stone. Naruto blinked before he remembered that Haro was a self-proclaimed sniper. So that's what he meant. Naruto shrugged. Works for me. He became aware of the fact that, still encased in the water cage, he hadn't yet been attacked. The fire-using Jonin just now seemed to be recovering from the fact that Kakuzu had appeared, let alone that his partner was now dead. He slipped outside of the hardened water cage, posture much more relaxed now that the Suton user was busy fighting his teacher and the Futon user was dead. Let's dance. Katan, Hozenka no Jutsu. No wind added to the flames meant he could counter the attack as he normally would, with an equally strong water jutsu. Suetun Mizurappa. The violent water waves showered over the miniature fireballs, extinguishing them with steaming hisses and forcing the Jonin to dodge the rest of the liquid. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Or completely overwhelm it. That's interesting. Water trumping fire was a natural part of the cycle of elemental manipulation, so the fact that Naruto's attack beat the Takinins wasn't overly surprising. The more intriguing part was that he, a Genin/Chunin, had easily overpowered a Jonin-level man's attack without even putting his best effort into the counter. Anomalies like that triggered one of Naruto's more masochistic personality quirks. As an analytical shinobi, Kakuzu often preached the concept of never rushing into battle unprepared, to never assume that his opponent didn't have any hidden tricks up his sleeve. Though not always able to abide by that rule, both overconfidence and rashness were fickle acquaintances of the blonde, Naruto had developed a peculiar tic for experimenting with his adversaries. By putting his body, which was mostly impervious to damage in the long term anyway, thanks to the Kyuubi, on the line, he could more accurately flesh out his enemy's abilities so he would know what to expect. A loose stream of fire was shot towards him, and this time Naruto successfully used Suiton, Suijin Hiki, calling up a vein of water from underground to defend him. The two techniques cancelled out, coating Naruto in vapor. He manipulated the air surrounding him to push the evaporated liquid away. "I have a hypothesis," Naruto stated with a growing smirk. "I think that your Jonin status and strength came from your partnership with your dead friend over there." The fading pallor of the man's skin tone prompted Naruto's smirk to grow into a full-blown grin. "Oh, this'll be too easy. Take away half of the duo, and the Jonin is revealed to be a Chunin." Using wind manipulation was still a no-no, of course, because no matter his rank, futon versus katon was still a terrible idea for whoever was utilizing the former. That was fine though, because if there was one thing Naruto possessed, it was variety. He spewed a large amount of water around the field with the violent water wave, dousing the area in a fine layer of fluid. The stream cut off, allowing the blonde to swallow thickly. There seriously has to be a better way to bring water to the field than just overpowering that, he mused with a scowl. I should really learn Bakusui Shoha. Pushing that thought aside for the time being, he began building his chakra for what he hoped would be the final move. One of his arms shot out at the Taki, interrupting what was sure to be another fire jutsu. The man dodged left, prompting Naruto's other arm to also lash out, roughly boxing in the man within two thick series of tendrils. Gotcha! His hands, now placed strategically behind the other man, came together, forming seals and utilizing the chakra he had prepared. Suiton, Suigaden! Too busy watching the writhing threads of Jiangsu slowly encroach on his position, the fire user wasn't aware of the rotating fangs of liquid until it was too late. Four different spouts pierced his body in varying areas. He cried out in pain, a signal the threads around him took to converge on his form and wrap him up tightly. Naruto mentally damned the sentience of the Kinjutsu as several of the black tendrils fought their way out of his control, burrowing deep into the Takinin's body and ensnaring his heart. They yanked, pulling out the muscle and ensuring that if the Suigaden hadn't killed the man, they certainly had. The Kinjutsu twined around the heart, preparing to integrate it into Naruto's chakra network. "No," he ordered firmly, "not this time." The threads seemed to defy him, insisting that it would be good to have this new organ. Naruto couldn't argue with that. Adding a third extra heart, his fourth in total, would increase the variability of techniques he could access when in battle. There were two unfortunate problems. The first, and smaller one, was that Naruto wasn't sure he had enough room on his back for a third heart. He was still a kid, and not exactly a big one at that, which rankled to admit. It was the second issue that had him fighting his own Kinjutsu's desires. Unlike Kakuzu, who had exchanged hearts and other organs, he was sure, who knew how many times over the decades and thus was used to the process. Integrating a new heart into his own system, if the first two times were any indication, was a process that involved pain and random fluctuations of elemental chakra. Considering the situation he and his teammates were preparing to run into, Naruto needed all of his faculties fully intact if the mission was to be successful. Through the bond he held with the threads, Naruto felt their hold on the heart slacken. His arms retracted and reconnected to the rest of his body, a single thread restitching each limb back in place. Soon, he placated, "You can do what you want in a little bit." Almost petulantly, they agreed to abide by their master's wishes. Temporarily, at least. Naruto turned his attention to Fu, who appeared to be struggling against her remaining opponent. Another lightning bolt streaked through the atmosphere and struck the Takinin, but this time it didn't do anything. The man stuck a kunai, crackling with lightning, into and through an earthen wall separating him from Fu, causing the structure to shatter. The blonde's mouth formed an O in understanding. Fu's remaining opponent was the Raiden user, so Haru's sniping attacks wouldn't do much to assist her in ending the fight. And Fu's talents were focused more intently on earth and dust releases, which explained why she was having difficulty retaliating. Fortunately, Naruto possessed enough raw aptitude with futon ninjutsu that nullifying the last waterfall ninja should be easy. Oh, she is so gonna owe me, the blonde commented to himself. He disappeared in a shunshin as the Taki dove forward with another lightning technique. Naruto reappeared between Fu and her opponent, right pointer and middle fingers held up just below his mouth, one in front of the other. A breath of air was exhaled, infused with his chakra. The lightning the Taki was using dispersed. The technique wasn't anything offensive, merely a way for Naruto to eliminate the sparks and prove Futon's superiority over Raiden. Yeah, you're screwed now, Naruto taunted as the man stared blankly. There weren't many times when Naruto was able to so easily flaunt his superiority. His only real associates were an S-class missing Nin and a jinchuriki who, whether she meant to or not, often one-upped him. Even he would admit that he was still more a student than a master, though it would hurt his pride to say so to anyone else, so the opportunity to show off and just beat the ever-living shit out of someone else was just a boost to his ego. Kakuzu would say that he didn't need any more pride than he already had, but Naruto felt that that was like the pot calling the kettle black. Of course, his teacher had his own ways to diminish the blonde's self-esteem, whereas all Naruto could do was annoy the man. They quite honestly had the worst give-and-take relationship he could ever imagine existing. But there were more urgent matters to attend to than focusing on his strange student-teacher bond with the ex-waterfall shinobi, and boy, would that require a lot of analysis. Topping that list was protecting Fu from her former home. Lightning crackled around the Takinin's fist, forming a bluish-white sheen over his knuckles shaped like claws. Wind whipped around Naruto's own clenched hand as he prepared the futon, senpuken. Both males punched at each other, their fists meeting in a collision of wills. Naruto's whirlwind fist overrode whatever lightning jutsu his opponent was using, the slicing winds shredding the man's hand and arm. Just like they had against the fire user, Jiangu's threads erupted from his body and skewered the man before he could react, reaching for his heart. No! He ordered the tendrils, and the kinjutsu withdrew back into his body. The blonde got the feeling that it was reacting like a kicked puppy. Thank you, he said aloud, feeling slightly foolish for doing so. The gratitude seemed to appease the threads, for they suddenly felt less tense. I will never get used to that, he muttered. It was just too weird having a sentient kinjutsu in his body which either wanted to take control of his faculties or sought approval from him. It was no wonder Kakuzu was as deranged as he was. Screw psychological disorders, he's just nuts from dealing with the threads for decades on end. A groan from behind him reminded Naruto of Fu's presence. Ugh, being earth-natured against a lightning-natured opponent sucks, she lamented, rubbing her arms. You owe me, he bragged, pointing a thumb at his chest proudly. I saved your ass. Yeah, my hero, she retorted with a roll of her eyes. I'm sure I'll return the favor someday soon, considering how much trouble you seemed to get yourself into. The Kyuubi jinchuriki huffed. He most certainly did not pout at the brush-off. We'll see. He paused, then you're okay, right? She nodded, and he suggested, well, now that this has been taken care of, maybe we should continue with the plan? Tell that to Kakuzu. Naruto glanced up to see Kakuzu exchanging blows with the masked Takinin. Oi, Kakuzu, aren't you done yet? LL. Kakuzu would grudgingly admit that Jiro was more talented than he initially gave him credit for. Granted, the Takinin's skill wasn't going to be enough to defeat him, but it was impressive nonetheless. Unfortunately for Jiro, there were two main factors working against him. One was the obvious age difference, which gave Kakuzu an extra 60 years of experience over his successor. The other was the fact that Kakuzu was, quite simply, pissed off. And getting in his way when on the warpath was generally considered a surefire ticket to one's untimely death. There were three root causes for Kakuzu's current wrath: the hidden leaf, the hidden waterfall, and Naruto. His ire with Konoha stemmed from his loss to the Shodai Hokage at the Valley of the End nearly a lifetime ago. It was a defeat he had never entirely recovered from, a lesson well learned on foreign shinobi. Ninja from the hidden leaf believed in the will of fire, an intangible force which somehow seemed to grant them strength beyond what Kakuzu thought they could normally achieve. The will of fire and his encounter with the first Hokage had turned not venturing into the land of fire a habit he wasn't particularly fond of. He could count on both hands the number of times he had willingly entered the giant land and stayed for an extended period of time in the decades before he had met Naruto. Despite the number of tantalizingly high bounties within Konoha's walls, he felt no need to experience a potential repeat performance of the mission that had caused his exile so long ago, even though the odds of someone having obtained the Senju's legendary Kekkai Genkai and sheer talent seemed incredibly low. Besides, the other elemental nations still possessed plenty of high-ranking ninja for him to hunt and test himself against. Quantity over quality seemed to apply itself quite well to his situation. Understandably then, the mercenary was quite frustrated with not only being in the Land of Fire, but actually within the main village. Especially since he hadn't been able to actually do anything until Orochimaru had started his thrice-damned invasion. Reading old books and scrolls, while an informative and time-consuming pastime of his, could only hold his interest for so long while cooped up in a hotel room inside a village he hated. But alas, Konoha was getting its just desserts, even if he wasn't the cause. He could take out his irritation with the Leaf Village by killing Orochimaru. The mercenary could easily pretend that the snake Sannin represented the village, even though the man no longer held any allegiance to the Leaf. Ironic, that to rid his frustration of Konoha, he was going to do away with one of its biggest traitors, but life was funny that way. On the other hand, Taki was a grudge well-deserved and long overdue for retribution. Much like he had with the Land of Fire, Kakuzu had avoided the Land of Waterfalls even more stridently, though for entirely different reasons. Being spotted by a citizen of the hidden waterfall would mean the village could confirm the fact that he actually was alive, and while the idea of killing any Takinin sent after him was a pleasant one, dealing with said pests would detract from valuable time spent hunting worthwhile bounties. So hateful of his former home was Kakuzu that he had always forced his one contact within the village, Tamura Tadao, the man who had been killed by Naruto for trying to blackmail him, to meet him far removed from Takigakure proper, normally within the Land of Grass. It was really Takigakure's fault that Kakuzu was being presented the opportunity to exact some form of vengeance against it though. Well, Taki's and Naruto's, but the blonde would reap the consequences of his actions soon enough. Takigakure was greedy, plain and simple. The village wished to obtain anything it could get its hands on: power, wealth, information. The list was rather endless. At the very least, the seed that had grown into Kakuzu's avarice had been sown in the early years of the Hidden Waterfall's history. Topping that list was the village council's goal: to be considered one of the great shinobi nations. To achieve such a prestigious title, to even hope for a chance at the opportunity, Taki always sent one of their elders to the Chunin exams with the purpose of gathering intelligence on the other hidden villages, always seeking an opening to rise to greatness. Any weakness in the infrastructure or upbringing of their allies could be exploited, or so thought the elders. It hardly mattered to them that success had been non-existent since the village's founding. They were too opportunistic to not take advantage of any opening provided to them. The Chunin exams were always a good time to reinforce that mindset, especially since Taki was currently a neutral nation and the risk of spectators being endangered during the examinations was minimal. Such greed was the reason Kakuzu had been sent on the mission which had led to his defection in the first place. Still, after having suffered through more than a month of being stifled within Konoha, a village he hated, and then being confronted by Taki, a village he absolutely loathed, Kakuzu felt that his rage, the nagging homicidal urge which caused him to lose sight of other things, was justified. If Naruto was lucky, the Nukanin's temper would be sated with the death of the current Gojyo Goko member. His current headache with the blonde was more based on the fact that if he hadn't felt the need to show off, the waterfall ninja currently attacking them would have been none the wiser to their presence. Half the time, it felt like Naruto purposely disobeyed orders just to rile the mercenary up. On some occasions, it took far more control than Kakuzu thought he possessed to not just try to kill the blonde and scrap the years put into raising him. But then his pupil would do something impressive or unthinkable, finding a 50-year-old summoning contract, or stealing a jinchuriki from her village without a fight, for instance, and Kakuzu would remember exactly why he put up with the Kyuubi's jailer. The boy had too much potential to not be steered in a direction Kakuzu could make use of. He would be the bounty hunter's second coming, a reminder of the horrors which inhabited the ninja world. Naruto and Kakuzu were already far too alike for the man to not be curious as to where his disciple would go with his strength. None of that meant that the little blonde shit was going to get off scot-free for causing this mess, though. Oi, Kakuzu, aren't you done yet? Kakuzu allowed his left arm to fall off his body, connected by only a single thin thread, to avoid a jet of water shot by his opponent. Wait your turn, brat, he snarled. Unless you would rather come over here and say that to my face. I'm good, thanks. Another stream of water was heading for Kakuzu, and the mercenary chose to dodge it. Naruto could be unbelievably frustrating when he chose to be, and Kakuzu was already trying to prove a point to his opponent. Can't you just use Doton, Doma, or any other earth jutsu to finish this? Why are you dragging this out? Which was that he was the superior Suiton expert. Cease your incessant talking, or I will make sure that your death is as excruciatingly painful as possible. With no response forthcoming, Kakuzu returned his attention to Jiro, eyes narrowed. As annoying as it is to admit, my student does have a point. Your time has come. It is truly a pity that the only shinobi Takigakure produced who is worth something is me. If that's what you want to believe, commented Jiro, forming seals. Water erupted from the ground, surrounding Kakuzu and encasing him in the same solid shell Naruto had been stuck in, except this time there was no opening. The hand signs continued. I've been the only Nami no Kodo since you to master using hardened water. And I've taken it to levels beyond a mere sword. Goodbye, Kakuzu. Whatever it was Jiro expected to happen, it wasn't the collapse of his water cage. Kakuzu smirked at the slight slump present in his enemy's shoulders, his hands held with palms out before him. You seem disappointed. Surely you were aware that as the creator of hardened water, I would know how to disable it. The man's silence was answer enough for the bounty hunter. This has been amusing, but I tire of this game. Suiton Baku Sui Shoha. Kakuzu spewed a torrent of water from his mouth, controlling it so that it flowed directly towards Jiro. Naruto was silently impressed by the display. Whereas Kisame typically vomited a flood of the liquid and then rode the cascading waves to attack his opponent, as Naruto was well aware from experience, Kakuzu seemed to bend a more controllable amount of water to his will, forcing it to do as he wanted, in this case, using a powerful river of liquid. The difference probably arose from the two men's combat style. Kisame often followed up the Baku Sui Shoha with ninjutsu that required volume, but seeing Kakuzu's manipulation was pretty cool, especially considering most of the Nukanin's favorite attacks were other large displays of power. Maybe he was as skilled with the element as he professed to be. Jiro held out his hands, swiftly turning the leading water into a hardened version of the Sujinhiki. The rest of Kakuzu's attack flowed around the barrier. Kakuzu rushed forward and punched the shield, shattering it as if it were ice. Spikes of hardened water stabbed him through the chest, but he collapsed into the liquid, a Mizu Bunshin. Jiro ducked instinctively, narrowly avoiding the decapitating slice of Kakuzu's water-cutting sword. The Taki placed his hands on the ground, calling up a box of hardened water to surround his predecessor. Knowing Kakuzu would escape, he jumped back and began running through seals. Water rose and swirled around his arm, hardening into a drill with his arm in the center. The box surrounding Kakuzu collapsed, the Nukanin already starting his own set of seals. Suiton, Mizu Kamakiri, he intoned as Jiro charged him. A jet of water burst forth from the ground, and Jiro was forced to jump to avoid being bisected by the rising water slicer. Kakuzu smirked. Fool. Suiton, Daibakufu no Jutsu. The water surrounding Kakuzu from his earlier techniques rose up in a vortex, moving towards the airborne Jiro. He manipulated the hardened water around his hand, quickly turning his drill into a convex shield which he held out in front of him. His shield absorbed the majority of the blow as Kakuzu directed the great waterfall technique at him, completely drenching him and following an arced curvature directly into the ground. As the pounding of the deluge stopped, Kakuzu stepped forward slowly. Jiro was bent on one knee, gasping in great breaths of air, his mask floating beside him. Standing out of the man's reach, Kakuzu lengthened his arm and allowed it to grab the porcelain sign of the Gojio Goko. His arm came back, allowing him to turn the object over in his hands. Did you know that wearing this was once a symbol of pride for me? Kakuzu mentioned loftily. Striving to achieve the title of the first Nami no Kodo drove me to risk everything for my village. And for what? Imprisonment. Betrayal. Exile. Your proud elders turned their backs on me in my time of need, and now look where they have left you. The chain has come full circle, and now you sit here, serving a council which has all but signed your death warrant with its greed. Tell me, how does it feel to walk in the shoes of the most reviled man to have come from Takigakure? I'm nothing like you, spat Jiro. Takigakure Ryu, Ian Maiden. Two halves of a coffin, spikes lining the interior, rose as hardened water and closed around Kakuzu. A moment later, the spikes jutted out the front and back of the Iron Maiden, having grown and completely impaled its inhabitant. Naruto's eyes widened at the swiftness of the man's brutality. Kakuzu. The sound of laughter caught everyone's attention. Kakuzu rose from the water as a liquidy mass, quickly solidifying into his human form. He clenched and unclenched his right hand, as if testing the fingers. An interesting expansion of the style. That certainly would have killed me, was I not years beyond your experience. You escaped that? Kakuzu snorted. You sound surprised. I already informed you that you are nothing compared to me. Truth be told, Kakuzu didn't like the fact that his successor possessed as much talent with his former specialty as he seemed to. In a battle where he wasn't trying to prove his superiority, Jiro would have already been dead, taken down by Jiangu, Raitan, Doton, or some combination of the three. As it was, limiting himself to only Suetun caused Kakuzu to play things a bit more cautiously, abusing the water clone and hiding in water techniques to lure out any surprises that he would normally just allow to be triggered with his active earth spear technique. It made him immensely glad that it was only his replica which had been killed in his opponent's Iron Maiden technique, and not him. Look at you, forced to go up against a man far your superior and now facing death. You are more like me than you realize. Unfortunately for you, I already have an apprentice who will walk in my footsteps. He performed 2 seals, causing a spike of hardened water to rise and spear toward Jiro from the front. Tired, the Taki flopped sideways to avoid it, but a second spike behind him tore through the base of his spinal cord and out his stomach. Die as you lived, you wretched fool, blind to your own ignorance. To think you believed you could actually kill me, the arrogance of Takigakure never ceases to amaze me. There was no response, but then again, he didn't expect one. Well, it's about time, Kakuzu. Here I thought, HGRK. Kakuzu reeled Naruto in close with his extended arm, his fingers digging into the blonde's throat. Give me one good reason not to kill you, you little shit. Naruto thrashed about in his teacher's grasp, facing slowly changing colors. His finger pointed to a spot at Kakuzu's 8 o'clock position. Getting away, he rasped. The Nuke placed one of his hearts within his arm, completely detaching it at the bicep and letting it scuttle over to where Arakawa Daisuke was trying to hobble away. It knocked away the man's cane, grabbing his ankle and allowing the threads coming out of the severed limb to wrap around the elder's body. Without even turning around, Kakuzu said, his retribution will come. You, on the other hand, single-handedly jeopardized our mission with your wanton desire to win a match against a genin for a promotion which you will never receive. So I ask again, a reason not to end your pathetic existence? Naruto's face was already a mottled blue from lack of oxygen when Fu stepped forward and suggested, maybe you should let him go so we can use him for the mission. Kakuzu looked at her, and then dropped the blonde. You are fortunate that at least someone finds you useful. Naruto, flat on his back and catching his breath, decided the appropriate response was to flip his teacher the bird. Kakuzu walked past him and stomped on his stomach, causing a spluttering gasp to escape the boy's throat. You never learn, he droned, a sadistic grin playing along his lips. And now we're even, Fu whispered to Naruto as Kakuzu moved over to Daisuke. The bounty hunter soon found himself standing before the elderly man. He held out the stump of his arm, allowing the limb to reattach to his body. Esteemed elder, he mocked, you seem to have taken a mighty fall. You killed my grandfather. Daisuke hissed violently. The deaths of gnats mean absolutely nothing to me. Your retribution will come one day, Takahashi Kakuzu, mark my words. Kakuzu laughed violently at that proclamation. You sicked your loyal dog on me, one of the elite Gojyo Goko, and he could not touch me while I limited myself to only 1 chakra nature. What do you expect the rest of the village to do against me, assuming they even realize it was I who killed you. Rest assured that if my time does come one day, it will not be by your hand." He held out his hand, creating the water-cutting sword. "When you get to hell, give your backstabbing grandfather my regards." The Nuke-Nin chuckled darkly as he swiped the blade perpendicular to the ground, severing the man's neck. All of the angry tension Kakuzu held suddenly disappeared with the man's decapitation. It was almost cathartic, the murder of influential people from his former village, even if their generation hadn't done anything against him directly until this point. The last time he had truly enjoyed killing someone for the sake of it, not for money, but simply for himself, had been a very long time ago. His laughter, low and dark, sadistic and mocking, was not an oft-heard sound, simply because Kakuzu found few people who said or did something which truly amused his peculiar sense of humor. Even Naruto's antics rarely stimulated Kakuzu's funny bone, though he did find some of the blonde's more spur-of-the-moment barbs and retorts an ironic mixture of amusing and frustrating, if only because he chose the worst times to incense his ire. Kakuzu looked up at the main watchtower. "The barrier is gone," he noted as Haro appeared from the stands. He shot Naruto a dirty look. "This distraction has cost us. There is no telling what sort of lead Orochimaru now has." The bounty hunter paused, scanning the three disguised rain genin. "When we find him, and we will find him, hold nothing back." His unusual eyes focused a bit more intently on Naruto when he said that. "Either give it your all, or be prepared to die." Naruto cracked his knuckles. Awesome. This was the opportunity he was looking for to finally use his entire arsenal of abilities. Limiting himself during the course of the Chunin exams to more easily keep their cover was rather annoying, and he was looking forward to actually showing his teammates and teacher just what he could do. "So," he said, bending his knees to jump off the ground, "you really are good with Suiten ninjutsu." "I was not the first Nami no Koto for arbitrary reasons." "That's a terrible name. You really need to stop saying it." He grunted as Kakuzu punched him in the back of the head, causing him to lose his balance mid-jump. "You should learn not to antagonize your betters." The porcelain mask of Takigaku's surging wave lay on the ground, all but broken in half from when Kakuzu's water clone had been caught in the Iron Maiden technique. Kakuzu cast one last glance at it, wondering if it was more symbolic or ominous. He pumped chakra to his legs and sped forward, only uttering, "Catch up when you can," to his subordinates as he moved onward. LL. Orochimaru had not lived for half a century by taking risks. Certainly there had been times when his life had been at stake because of his own arrogance, but for the most part, he had things planned well enough in advance that all eventualities could be accounted for. Even then, all those times could essentially be summed up on one hand. The fight against Hanzo the Salamander during the Second Shinobi World War with his two teammates Jiraiya and Tsunade could be considered one of his failings. There was little doubt in his, or his two teammates', mind that if it weren't for Hanzo's generosity, he would be dead. It was then and there that his team had been bequeathed with the title of Sannin, and also the time when he had decided to begin research into immortality. The discovery of his secret laboratory by his sensei had also been a bit of a loss, though a relatively small one because he had taken into account being found out at some point. That had led to his defection from Konoha and his initiation into Akatsuki, where his dreams had started to come to fruition. Then he had gotten blindsided by his ambition to learn all the jutsu in the world and had tried to take over new recruit Uchiha Itachi's body for its Kekkai Genkai. That had been a massive failure, forcing him to abandon his affiliation with the criminal organization and switch into a new body to regain the use of his left hand. Again though, he had been able to turn that into a positive with the addition of the more than capable Yakushi Kabuto to his staff and the founding of Otogekyo to further his experiments, research, and expansion of power. So when the time had come to finally enact his plan to destroy Konoha, Orochimaru took no chances. He enlisted the aid of Tsunagekyo to increase the invasion's forces, as well as making sure that Gaara, the jinchuriki to Ichibi no Shikaku, would play an intricate part in causing mayhem, thus distracting a large portion of Konoha's soldiers. His personal guard, the Sound Four, would box himself and his former sensei within the Shishiinjin, the Four Violet Flames battle encampment, to ensure that the Hokage's death at his former pupil's hand was an uninterrupted affair. He had even gone so far as to kill the Yondaime Kazekage and assume the man's position to both guarantee the unquestionable cooperation of the Sand Shinobi and to get closer to the Hokage. It was rather shocking to discover just how badly the best-laid plans could turn out. Kabuto, at least, had played his part perfectly, knocking out the majority of Konoha's forces, though most were citizens, with Nihon Shoujo no Jutsu. That, perhaps, had been the only part of the plan that had gone off without a hitch. Gaara had prematurely tried to summon Shikaku because of Sasuke, and here Orochimaru was unsure whether to feel blessed that his vessel-to-be was so strong or frustrated that the boy had ruined his invasion, which had resulted in him being removed from the stadium by his siblings. Then, after being caged within the Shishinjin, he had failed to revive the Yondaime Hokage alongside the Shodai and Nidaime. That in itself wasn't too terrible, simply because while the Yellow Flash was indeed an amazing shinobi, Orochimaru didn't believe that Sarutobi, at his advanced age, could stand up to his two predecessors and himself. But again, the Snake Sannin had been surprised when his former teacher had activated a jutsu him, the searcher of all jutsu, had never heard of. Orochimaru cursed his own arrogance and foolhardiness as the technique activated. The darkness cast from the Shodai's Kokuangyo no Jutsu was disappearing, which could only mean that the man had somehow been defeated. How, Orochimaru didn't know, since Edo Tensei was supposed to be an unbeatable technique, for all intents and purposes, but he was not willing to risk his life to see what it was. He lost the grip of the legendary sword Kusanagi in an exchange of blows with the Sandaime, but restrained Enma the Monkey King with a well-timed Sanaijushu. That opening allowed the Hokage to grab and restrain him. "No!" he hissed. Moving two of his fingers, he gestured Kusanagi from where it lay. Levitating the blade out of the reach of Enma as the monkey grabbed for it, the Kusanagi sliced cleanly into and through the Sandaime's heart. There was a moment where the old man looked at him, slightly stunned, and then he coughed up a globule of blood and fell over dead. Enma disappeared along with the snakes entangling him, and the Sannin breathed a silent sigh of relief. The feeling of cold and death permeated his stomach where something, the jutsu, he presumed, had dug in. Some things were far too close for comfort. Orochimaru signaled the Sound 4 to drop the barrier, allowing the ANBU waiting outside it to rush them. Kadamura shot a web of chakra-enhanced netting at them, and snaring them within its confines as Orochimaru withdrew his sword from the Hokage's corpse. Ku. Foolish old man, first you fell, and now your village will be next. Come, he beckoned to his subordinates, we should find Gaara and bring him back to properly continue with the plan. The quintet took off, leaping from one building to the next and avoiding the triple-headed snake that was wreaking havoc upon Konoha's infrastructure. Orochimaru smirked at the thought of the ruin his former village would be in once the rest of his plan finished playing out. Aside from the Hokage, dead, the other two Sannin, either of whom were in the village, and potentially Danzo, and who knew where he was, there was no one in Konoha who could stand up to the snake Sannin. So when he sensed the presence of a powerful chakra signature approaching from behind at a fast pace, he was curious. Outrunning the source was a possibility, except that at some point the Sannin would be forced to stop to restrain Gaara, allowing his pursuer to catch up. Orochimaru preferred to fight on his own terms, so he signaled his subordinates to halt and then waited. Only a minute passed before Orochimaru and the Sound 4 were confronted by a large man with shoulder-length brown hair, a partially stitched mouth, and eyes that reminded the Sannin uncomfortably of Hanzo's. "Orochimaru," intoned the man. "Ah, so you are aware of who I am? How intriguing," he replied with a quiet chuckle. "Tell me," he continued, noticing the color of the flak jacket worn by the man, "what does a lowly jonin from Amagakure think he can do against the likes of me?" The man stripped off the jonin vest and the long-sleeved black shirt he wore under it. Orochimaru's serpentine eyes narrowed at the stitch-like markings that decorated the man's bare torso and arms. "I belong to no village," he corrected. "My name is Kakuzu, and I am here to kill you on Akatsuki's orders." Ku, so my former partners have finally seen fit to eliminate me, have they? And yet your lack of ring implies that you're not even a member. How amusing you are. Kakuzu frowned internally at the brush-off. It would have been unrealistic to expect the former Leaf Nin to show some form of fear at his presence, but such an easy dismissal of his intention implied that the man was completely unconcerned with his presence. The bounty hunter couldn't say for sure whether Orochimaru actually knew of him. He tried to keep his presence hidden from the majority of the world, but the underground was a completely different place. But the fact that Akatsuki had sent him should have at least instilled some form of hesitation in his prey. After all, Kakuzu's strength was nothing to sneeze at. A wicked grin crossed Orochimaru's features. "Kill him," he ordered before turning around and leaping into the trees. Kakuzu said nothing as the 4 shinobi serving as the Sanin's guard surrounded him. They looked to be getting into formation for some sort of barrier jutsu, and the former Taki had to stop himself from rolling his eyes. Futon de Tapa. Kakuzu stood his ground as a great burst of wind swept through the area, throwing 3 of the 4 sound shinobi off their feet. The orange-haired one was apparently heavy enough to withstand the gale. "It took you long enough," he stated without even looking back. "Yeah, so sorry about that," griped Naruto. The blonde landed behind his teacher, Fu to his left, and Haro to his right. "Have you ever tried keeping up with you?" "The idiocy of that statement deserves no response," Kakuzu replied curtly. "Orochimaru took off already. Take care of his minions while I land the big prize." With that, he disappeared into the forest before any of the Otonin could catch him. Naruto watched him go, intent on proving to Kakuzu that he was an asset, even if the older man wasn't around to witness it. His gaze then turned to the 4 shinobi opposite his team. The closest to him was a heavy-set boy with an orange mohawk hairdo. Behind him was a red-haired girl with a black cap, a dark-skinned boy with 6 arms, and a pale-skinned boy with bluish-gray hair and some sort of deformity, which looked strangely like a second head sprouting from his neck. All of them wore clothing of a neutral color, accented awkwardly, in Naruto's opinion, by a ridiculous purple bow tied around their waists. Taking the initiative, he shouted, "I call the fat one." Almost simultaneously, that Otonin knelt to the ground and lifted up a massive oblong piece of earth, uprooting a number of trees in the process. Naruto watched with wide eyes, mentally trying to figure out exactly how such a feat was even possible. Then the huge stretch of earth was thrown at them. "Trade!" he yelped, leaping away. There was a discharge of lightning that bypassed Naruto and struck the earth jutsu, blowing a hole in the center of the dirt and causing it to explode into large, but more easily avoidable, chunks. Much of the surrounding foliage toppled over as a result. The blonde glanced backwards to find Haro staring down the Doton user. "It looks like I'll have the advantage in this fight," the Rain Rebel informed him. "I hope you can handle 2 of them." "Sounds fair," Naruto replied with a grin, sufficiently over his momentary panic. After being saved by Kakuzu in his prior 2-on-1, 2.5, technically, fight, the jinchuriki was eager to take on the same challenge with a more positive outlook. And if he didn't have to fight the fat boy, Jirobo, judging by the bickering between him and the redhead, Taiyuya, apparently, the more power to him. Naruto wasn't stupid enough to believe that he had the advantage in that fight after witnessing the uplifting of the land, what with his chakra affinities being unsuited for the battle and his physical strength nowhere near the Otonins. Haro at least had the benefit of being elementally superior to Jirobo. A quick peek to the left showed that Fu was squaring off against the pale-skinned boy with the weird protrusion, leaving him with the multi-armed boy and Taiyuya. "Let's see what you 2 got," he commented with a grin. "Fucking piece of trash," shot Taiyuya. "Kidamaru, if you can't take care of him while I prepare my melody, you're even more useless than the fat ass over there." "Heh, no worries. It'll be game over for him while you're busy fooling around," smirked the multi-armed boy. "Let's play a little game, Blondie." Then his cheeks bulged. "Kumo Shirbari." Naruto pointed at the large web as it was emitted from the Otonin's mouth. "EW," he whined, "that's just disgusting." He used the Kawarimi to escape out of the netting's range by switching with a nearby rock from the fat Otonin's first assault. "Oh, a mobile opponent, eh?" mused Kidamaru. "I guess we'll up the difficulty level a bit." Kumo Saka. This time, instead of a wide net of spider silk, the multi-armed boy spat out conical-shaped webs at a rapid rate, forcing Naruto to dance around to avoid them. He was doing fairly well until the projectiles seemed to multiply in midair. With one of them heading straight for his chest, and unable to effectively dodge thanks to the surplus surrounding him, he withdrew his wakizashi, applied wind chakra, and sliced downward. It passed right through, causing the image of the webbing to fade away. Genjutsu. He quickly brought his hands up, dropping the blade tip first into the ground so as to not stab himself, and focused on stopping his chakra. Kai! Half of the spider webs disappeared. Ha! I broke through one by myself. His victory was short-lived when one web wrapped itself around his left leg, another plastering his clasped hands to his chest. Son of a, I hate genjutsu. Ha, looks like you're not even a main character, taunted Kidamaru. He reached into his mouth and pulled out 6 strings of golden spit, which he proceeded to bite off. They formed into spikes of hardened material, one end curved into a wicked tip. Kidamaru grinned wickedly. Game over.